Hi everyone, I'm Modelman and welcome to my YouTube channel where I make tutorials on how to use the latest version of Moho. The 14th version of this software has just been released, and in this video I'm gonna show you all the differences between Moho 13.5 and Moho 14. Mostly I'm gonna focus on the new options and features and improvements in Moho 14. I will literally cover all of the changes that happened in it and compare every single one of them with Moho 13.5. I'll also talk about the new bugs that Moho 14 brings and the bugs from Moho 13.5 that haven't been solved in Moho 14. This video will help you decide whether you should buy Moho 14 or not. So let's get right into it. Before I start, it's good to know that there are two series of tutorials about Moho 14 that have been uploaded on Moho's official channel, so you can go and watch them if you want. However, this tutorial is going to focus on comparing Moho 14 with Moho 13.5. Alright, let's start with the installation folder. The address of directory has been changed. This folder is for Moho 13.5. This one is for Moho 14 and this one is for Moho 12. Since they have different directories, your system will recognize them as different softwares. And this gives you the ability to have all of them opened separately at the same time, which is really great. Moho 14 will be opened as fast as Moho 13.5. You don't need to worry about low speed nor lags. Instead of this old splash screen, now we have this new dark splash screen for Moho 14, which I really like it. The logo of the software is being changed and the orange gradient has been replaced with a red color. We can see the updated logo at the top left corner of the software. In Moho 13.5, the first time that you open Moho, you can see the welcome screen and the library window. In Moho 14, instead of an image of a fox, we have a dragon for the welcome screen, and since the logo of the library was for Moho 12, finally they changed it to the new logo. In Moho 13, only the word Moho is written at the top of the software, whereas in Moho 14, rather than the word Moho, being Pro or Debut is also written in front of it. In the past, many users used to ask me in the comment section, is this the Pro version or the Debut version that you're teaching? However, you don't need to ask it anymore. Now you just have to look at the top left corner of the screen, and it's right there. In Moho 13.5, most of the values didn't have any unit, while in Moho 14, we can see units such as degree, percent, and pixel in front of most of the values. In fact, since the exported version is based on pixels, having a unit helps you understand the measurements and dimensions of your project better. In Moho 13.5, there was a red rectangle around your workspace. However, in Moho 14, it's a bit faded. Also in Moho 13.5, when you had multiple views, there was a gray rectangle around the selected view, whereas now in Moho 14, if you have multiple views, you'll see a blue rectangle around the view that you select. In Moho 13.5, you had thick borders, and sometimes they came over your shapes and were annoying. Also, occasionally you asked yourself, is this pixel a part of my render? How about the pixel next to it? But in Moho 14, you have one pixel lines for the borders of your frames, so they won't be annoying. Also, you're not gonna get confused about shapes being inside or outside of the frame. On the other hand, corners are still thick, so you can recognize them better. By now, you may have noticed that in Moho 14, we have more space than Moho 13.5. Actually, you can have more space in Moho 13.5 by going to View and selecting Show Document tabs to uncheck it. And then your document will have more space, just like Moho 14. Now let's test it in Moho 14. When you have one document opened, there would be no document tab. In these kind of cases, the only way to close a document is to use close option in the file drop-down menu, or you can use its shortcut. Interestingly, as soon as you create another document, you will have the document tabs. It might be a feature or a bug, I'm not sure, but as I said, when we only have one document opened in Moho 14, there will be no document tab. However, if you go to View, you can see that the Show Document Tabs option is checked. If we uncheck it, obviously nothing's gonna happen. But if you go and check it again, or use its shortcut, we'll have one document and also its document tab, just like Moho 13.5. Now let's talk about changes in file drop-down menu. Save all option has been removed. In Moho 13.5, if you choose it, it will go through every document that you have and it tries to save it. If you have saved it before, it will update the saved file unless it will ask you for the address to save your project for the first time. So it helped you quickly save all of the open documents. It wasn't a bad feature. But since it tried to ask for the address of all of the documents that you had not saved yet, sometimes you didn't know for which document Moho is asking the question. Therefore, users prefer to use the save option instead. So it wasn't a really necessary option. If we go to import, we can see some new changes. For instance, the library has been updated in Moho 14. You can import more characters than before, but there is a new bug with Night Boy. If we import it into Moho 14, the software will crash. However, if you use the open option instead of importing it, the software won't crash. I have no idea why. Maybe the programmers of Moho 14 could answer this question. In Moho 13.5, there was a vector file option which allowed you to import SVG, Adobe Illustrator files, and EPS files. The Adobe Illustrator option has been removed because if you have saved your file with the newer versions of Illustrator, Moho cannot open that file. Your file needs to be saved for Illustrator 8 or earlier. The reason that they removed the Adobe Illustrator option for Moho 14 is that it was really old and it didn't support the features that have been added since version 8. And in case you want to know, Illustrator version 8 was released in 1998. So when I say old, I mean that old. Although Moho 14 doesn't have a direct option to import Illustrator saved files, you still can import them using general import option. However, again in Moho 14, your Adobe Illustrator saved file should be saved for Illustrator 8 or earlier versions. So when you want to save your Illustrator file, you should choose Illustrator 8 option or one of the earlier versions. And then you'll see this message that says it's an older format. So you may lose the parts of your work that you made with newer features of Illustrator. But at least you can import the vectors, points, and curves correctly. Then in Moho 13.5, you go to File, Import, Vector File, and then choose Adobe Illustrator file. It will be imported as one single layer, and the colors of the fills and strokes and the width of the strokes are correct. And to import your Illustrator 8 saved file into Moho 14, you go to File, Import, and then General Import. Again, we will have one single layer, also the width and the colors of the strokes are correct. EPS option has also been removed. In Moho 13.5, you can use this option to import EPS files. If you have saved it with newer versions of Illustrator, you can import it into Moho, but it will be ruined. And also the same thing happens to Moho 14 when you want to import an EPS file saved with newer versions of Illustrator. So again, it's better to save your Illustrator project with Illustrator 8 EPS so that Moho 13.5 can import it correctly. Although Moho 14 doesn't have an EPS option, you can import Illustrator 8 EPS files by going to Import and choosing General Import, and then your EPS file will be imported correctly. The reason they removed it is that it was as old as Illustrator 8 and it didn't support the newer features of Illustrator. Here is what we've learned from Adobe Illustrator files and EPS files. As you can see, if you use Adobe Illustrator files or EPS files, you can only import colors, paths, and widths. So does it mean that Moho is not capable of importing the new features of Illustrator, or is there another way? Never underestimate Moho. There must be another way. We haven't talked about SVG yet. To test this format and show you how powerful it is, I want to create a simple project in Illustrator. First, we bring the windows that we need for our project. Then we draw a shape to test the color of the fill and the width of the strokes. This time let's draw a circle and make it transparent. Let's change its fill and stroke and give it a different width. For the next shape, I want to test the linear gradient feature. I don't want a black and white gradient, so let's make it RGB. For the left side, maybe we have a blue color. And for the right side, I think it's better to use a green color. To make it harder for Moho, let's just change its length and also its angle. It's good to have another shape to test the radial gradient feature and maybe another one for freeform gradient. It's time to challenge Moho by testing styles. For this new shape, I want to use a drop shadow style. Let's increase blur to make it more visible. The next style that I'm gonna test is feather, but since our shape has a stroke, it's better to remove it so we can see the effect better. For the next shape, I would like to test inner glow with more blur. And for the next one, let's give it outer glow effect. To make it visible, I would like to use a black color. And let's increase the value of blur. It is time to apply the round corners effect with a radius that can be seen. And for our next shape, we can test scribble effect. Let me change the spacing. And finally, I want to test the mask, so I draw two different shapes. Let's change the color of one of them and apply the mask. And to make it harder for Moho, I want to move some of the handles to make the path a little bit weird. And I want you to remember that this time we're using Save As option to create our SVG file. Then we choose SVG format and click on Save. A window will pop up with those settings. We click on OK. Then an error says Illustrator can't export something, but we don't give a fine. Let's test it in Moho 13.5. To import it into Moho 13.5, we go to File, Import Vector File, SVG file, then select our file and choose Open. As you can see, Moho 13.5 imported our project as one single layer. Okay, let's start with fill. As you can see, the color of the fill has been imported correctly. Also, Moho uses alpha value to create transparency. Also, the color and the transparency of the strokes have been imported correctly. We have a white color for linear and radial gradient, and the freeform gradient has been replaced with nothing. And as you can see, drop shadow effect cannot be imported even if you render, and feather effect has not been imported. And applying inner glow effect in Adobe Illustrator will make your shape transparent in Moho, and we have completely lost the outer glow effect. Let's look at the next shape. Yes, the round corners have been imported correctly, and the scribble effect has been converted into a path. If I select Transform Points tool and zoom a little bit, you can see that I can move the points of its path, and although the blue shape has not been masked inside the orange shape, the handles of the orange shape are correct. To test it in Moho 14, we go to File, Import an SVG file. Then we choose our file and click on Open. After that, we can change the import settings, but for now we click on OK. It seems it works, but before we test it, I want to test the other method as well. This time I'm going to go to File, Export, and then Export As. Let's see if this method is better than the previous method that we used. Okay, first I'm going to test it in Moho 13.5. Holy fine! Let's test it in Moho 14. I think it doesn't work in Moho 13.5. Okay, this is our last hope to import an SVG file into Moho 14. Let's see what happens. We go with default settings. Wow, it is way better than Moho 13.5. The whole project has been imported as a group. Also, it recognizes the layers of our Illustrator project. As you can see, the color of the first shape is correct. And we have the right transparency for the second shape. Let's check its stroke as well. Yeah, it is completely correct. Linear and radial gradient have been imported correctly, but Moho removes your freeform gradient. There is no drop shadow effect. It seems Moho deleted the shape with the feather effect. Let me use layer selector to find this layer. In fact, it's a group with two sublayers. There is a transparent shape on the top, as you can see. And below it we have nothing. How do I know we have nothing? Because if you select it, the transform points tool will be gray, meaning that there is no point to move. Next we have inner glow effect, and unfortunately it couldn't be imported. And now it's time to check outer glow effect, but it's just a simple shape with no effect. However, round corners have been imported correctly. Also, scribble effect has been converted into a path, which is totally acceptable. And finally our mask. Amazingly, it's been converted into a masked group. The layer on top was our blue shape, which is correct, and the area of our mask was actually an orange shape, which is also correct. Note that Moho made it transparent while it wasn't actually a transparent shape in Adobe Illustrator. To compare, I should say while in Moho 13.5 only the Save As option works, in Moho 14 you're free to choose between Save As and Export As. Also, Moho 14 can import linear and radial gradient and masks, whereas Moho 13.5 is not capable of doing it. And if you expect to import freeform gradient, drop shadow, feather, inner and outer glow effects, you have to wait for future versions of Moho. I'm gonna skip this table in 3, 2, and 1. After File drop-down menu, it's time to talk about Draw drop-down menu. As you can see, Create Smart Warp Layer has been renamed to Create Mesh Layer. About the word smart, I have to say that it was completely extra. I mean, everything is smart these days. And warp layer is actually a feature in Moho that allows you to control your vector layers and image layers using the points of other layers. In Moho 13.5, there are two different methods that you can use. One is to draw a quad mesh manually and then tell your image or your vector layer to follow that quad mesh. The other way, which can be done automatically or manually, is to use triangular mesh, which lets you to control your images or vectors using triangles. In both of these methods, we call the layer of our quad mesh or triangular mesh warp layer. Other than these two features, now we have a new feature in Moho 14 called curve layer, which lets you animate your shapes using a line. So since in the past you were only dealing with meshes for your warp layers, there was only one option to create a warp layer, which created a triangular mesh for you, whereas now it is separated into 3 options to choose between a warp layer with a mesh or a warp layer with a line. Then you may ask why we have 2 options for the line. What's the difference? To answer this question, I have to first teach you how to use curve layers. First, I'm gonna import my image. After importing it, make sure that the layer of your image is selected and you're on the frame 0, and then you can choose create curve layer or create compressible curve layer. For now, I'm gonna choose create curve layer. A warp layer including a line was created on top of your image, and since we had selected our image before we created our warp layer, if we double click on our image and go to image tab, you can see that Moho already told our image to follow our warp layer. You can also recognize your warp layers by the name of them and the icon of them. As you know, in Moho, frame 0 is for designing and other frames are for animating. Therefore, while you're on the frame 0, moving the points of your line doesn't move the points of your image. This allows you to add and set your points in your favorite positions. It is very important to know that your line and its blue width should cover all parts of your image, unless the parts of your image which are outside of your line will be disappeared when you are on the frames other than 0. Let me show you the problem with the other side as well. So to fix this problem, we should move the start and end point of our line to outside of our image. Also, if the width of our line doesn't cover our image when we are on the frames other than 0, we will lose the parts of our image that are outside of the width of our line. So it's better to adjust the width of the points of our line to define how much every one of these points is going to have control over your image. Now our image is ready to test. To animate it, first you have to go to a frame other than 0, and you can see that we can move its points or work with Bezier handles and curves. All of them can be animated using a single line, which is amazing. Now let's talk about what compressible means and why we have 2 options for curve layers. After creating your curve layer, if you go to its layer settings and the vectors tab, since this layer is not a compressible curve, by moving one of its points, you're stretching the whole image. But if you make it compressible, then moving a point will only stretch the part of your image that is controlled by that point. To test how curve layers can animate vector layers, first I go back to frame 0 and create a new layer and try to draw a shape just like the image that I tested. It really doesn't matter how you create your shape, you can use any method that you want. For example, in this case, I'm using Add Point tool to create my shape. After creating it, I'm gonna move it to the back of our image so I can adjust its points better and make it look like our image. In the previous example, we tested curve layer for images. Now in this example, let's test curve layer for a vector layer. Look how I put a point at the start and a few pairs of points at both sides looking at each other. Having one point or a pair of points helps you find the best places to put the points of your curve layer. While our vector layer is selected, we can go to draw and choose create curve layer to create a curve layer for our vector layer. However, this time I'm going to show you another way to do this. To use this method, first create a vector layer. I want to rename it. Then using add point tool, I'm going to draw a line. And remember that this line that we're drawing is going to be the line of our curve layer. And then we double click on our vector layer and go to vectors tab and choose the layer of our line as our curve layer. And you can see that it is converted to a warp layer because the name of it is gray. Let's see what will happen if your line doesn't cover all of the shapes of your vector layer. Unlike using curve layers for images, when you go to the other frames, the parts of your shape that is outside of your line won't disappear. However, you will lose your control over the points of that area. This time I want to test what will happen if the width of our line doesn't cover our shape. As you can see, again, nothing will disappear if we go to other frames, but we will lose our control over the points of that area. So it's better to adjust the width of your line based on the thickness of your shape. Less thickness in your shape needs less width in your line. And now it's time to test it, so we go to a frame other than 0 and try to move its points. It's not compressible, but we can make it compressible by going to the layer settings of our warp layer, and then we go to the vectors tab. If we make it compressible by moving a point, only the position of that point itself will change. But when it is not compressible, moving a point will change the position of all of the other points. For now, let me make it compressible and click on apply and then OK. And you can see that for vector layers, using compressible curves is way better than using curve layers that are not compressible. If you remember, in Moho 13.5 there was a feature called Smart Bones, and using that feature you could control your warp layers using a bone, and that feature is still available in Moho 14. And the good news is, other than quad mesh and triangular mesh, you can use that feature to control your curve layers using a bone. The process is the same. First, make sure your bone group and select bone tool is selected. After that, you open the action window and dock it if you want. And since we don't want our bone to have any direct effect on our shape, while our bone is selected, we have to select bone strength tool and set its strength to 0. Then we create an action with the name of our bone, and then we tell Moho when we rotate our bone, these points of our curve layer should be like this. And to make it easier, I'm gonna limit the angle of my bone to be between -90 degrees and 0. Now that my smart bone is ready, I double click on main line. And to test my smart bone, I go to a frame other than 0 and try to rotate my smart bone. Wow, it works, so we can create an animation. I want you to pay attention to the fact that we're animating the whole thing using a bone that controls a line that controls a shape. Therefore, at the same time, we still have control over our curve layer, and we can move the points of our line and create keyframes for them. And other than creating keyframes for your bone group and your curve layer, you still have the chance to control the points of your shape by selecting the layer of your shape and moving its points apart from the keyframes that you have created for your bone group and your curve layer. As you can see, there is nothing that you can't control. So actually in this example, you have 3 levels of control using a bone, a line, or the points of your shape, which gives you the ability to animate your shape generally, partially, or in detail. Also, if you have an image like this one, that different parts of it are separated from each other, you can click on draw and choose create compressible curve layer for it. Using transform points tool, I can put this point here, put this one here, hit the A key, add a point here. Then I hit the T key, move this point to here, hit W, decrease its width, and also for this one, and this one. Then I hit the T key, hold down the control and select all of these points, hit Control C, and then V to make a copy of it. Then I'm gonna move this one to here, and flip it, and adjust its position. I'm gonna hold down the control and click on somewhere, Then I hit the A key, drag from here to here, and then from here to here to add another curve, and then I hit W and decrease its width, and also for this point and that one. You have to adjust their width so they will be separated from each other. Then I'm gonna hit the T key, hold down the Control, select this point, and then I hold down the Control and Shift and add these 2 points to my selection. Hit Control C and V to make a copy of it. Then I flip it and move this one to here. I'm gonna hold down the Control and click on somewhere to deselect the point. Again, I hit the A key, drag from here to here. I hit W, decrease its width, and decrease the width of this one. Then I hit the T key, hold on the Control and select these 2 points. Hit Control C and then V to make a copy of it and move it to here. After that, I hit the A key, drag from here to here. Then I hit W and decrease their width like this. Then I hit the A key, drag from here to here. And I hit W and decrease the width of this point and also this one. And it's better to hit the T key, hold down the Control and select them, move them to down here. Then again I hit W, hold down the Control and click on somewhere and decrease the width of this point like this. And you can see that when you have an image layer that the parts of it are separated from each other, you can rig it like this and then go to a frame other than 0. And using Transform Points tool and Curvature tool, you can animate them. For example, let's say we want this part to be like this. And we want to move this point to up here and also this one. And you can add point to it anytime you want. For example, we can go back to frame 0, hit A and add a point here. So now we can go back to frame 24, hit the T key and move these 2 points to up here like this. I'm going to do the same thing with this one and that one. See? And another thing is that rather than the position of the points, you can hit the C key and using Curvature tool, you can change the curvature of these points. And also, the width of them can be animated as well. You can use it to change the scale of a part of your image. For example, if we want to make this part bigger, we can just drag to right. And we can do the same thing actually with this part and that one. And then I hit the T key and move this one to here and this one to here. So now if I go back to frame 0, hold down the Control and right click on frame 24 and play the animation, you can see that rather than the changes that we have for the position of the points, the mouth is getting bigger throughout the animation. And this way, using curve layer, you can rig and animate faster than before. A new option called Reset Visible Points has been added. I'll talk about it when I'm explaining new options in timeline, so wait for it. After Draw drop-down menu, it's time to take a look at Bone drop-down menu. Use selected bones for flexi-binding has been renamed to Link Bones to Layer. It's just the same option, they've only changed the name of it. The new name is shorter, which makes it easier to remember. And also it tells us that we can use it to connect one bone or multiple bones to a layer. Also, there is a new option called Reset Visible Bones. I'll talk about it when I'm explaining the options in timeline window. After that, we have a script drop-down menu. Only one change can be seen. A new script has been added called Delay Constraints. This new script will make your rigging process really faster. I'll teach you how to use it when I'm explaining control bones. Also, new changes can be seen in View drop-down menu. For example, we have a new option called Flip Canvas, and its shortcut is Shift F. Using this option, you can flip your workspace. And the next change is that the Design Mode option has been renamed to Toggle Frame 0. It's just the same option and they've only changed the name of it. While the previous name was confusing, this new name shows that we use this option to quickly switch between our current layer and frame 0. Also, the Stereo option has been removed. In Moho 13.5, if you set your stereo rendering to red, blue, and glyph and increase the value of eye separation and then click on OK and then go to view and enable the stereo option, you can see the result of your 3D rendering in real time. Let me hit Ctrl R so you can compare it with the render. You have to give it some time to complete the render. See, it wasn't a bad option, and I don't know why they've removed it. Maybe they thought it was unnecessary, or maybe you know the answer, so why not share it with us in the comment section. In Moho 14, the red, blue, and glyph option is still available. However, when you go to view, there is no option to see the result in real time. Also, they forgot to do something. When you go to edit and edit keyboard shortcuts, you'll see the shortcuts of Moho 14. But the problem is they forgot to remove stereo. You may think maybe the shortcut still works, but believe me, I tested it. It doesn't. Finally, the last drop-down menu is Help. The Help option itself has been changed to User Manual, telling you that we use it to open User Manual. In Moho 13.5, it opens a PDF, and in that PDF you'll learn how to use Moho. But in Moho 14, they've converted that PDF into an online user manual, which is really great. However, it would be better if they made it easier to search. To show you an example, let's say in Moho 13.5, we want to see what Immune to Camera does. So we just go to its user manual, which is a PDF version, and we hit Ctrl F and search for it, and we can quickly find it. This way we can learn everything that we want. But in the user manual of Moho 14, we can only search for the titles of the chapters. It is not possible to search for an option. Since Moho 14 has just been released, I'm sure they will update it. But if you use Moho 14 now and you want to search for an option, there is a way that you can do. First, find the name of the window of your option, then try to search it or scroll down to find it. After that, you can scroll to find the option, or you can hit Ctrl F and search for it. It's not a fast way, but it still does the work. The name of tutorials option hasn't been changed. In Moho 13.5, when you click on it, it opens another PDF rather than user manual. In this PDF, you will find some examples that teach you how to use different features of Moho. In Moho 14, on the other hand, it opens an online version of it, and there is a new chapter for Moho 14 that has been added to this version. Online tutorials has been renamed to video tutorials because in Moho 13.5, user manual was a PDF, and then you had some online tutorials. But in Moho 14, all tutorials are online, so there is no need to say that it is online. In Moho 13.5, it opens a playlist of some YouTube tutorials, and in Moho 14, it will do the same thing. In Moho 13.5, online video gallery opens the Moho's official YouTube channel, whereas in Moho 14, you have access to all Moho's official accounts. Download free content has been removed because if you click on it in Moho 13.5, you can see that nothing's free anymore. Buy content is now below welcome screen. In Moho 13.5, it opens a link where you can buy different courses and content packs. And Moho 14 will open the same link as well. Update license has been renamed to refresh license, and license manager and register your product have been removed. In fact, you can do everything online using your Moho account in this version. So as soon as you open Moho, a link will be opened and then you can sign up. As I said, welcome screen has been updated, but I think there is a problem with it. In Moho 13.5, when you click on introductory tutorial, your tutorial manual will be opened. But in Moho 14, if you click on that option, you will see an error. I guess it's because there is no PDF for this version. Finally, About Moho has been renamed to About Moho Pro 14. So actually they've added the information of your version in front of the word Moho. And now it's time to talk about the options at the top of timeline window. I'm gonna start with display. As you can see, display quality has been renamed to display. In the past, you had some presets such as wireframe, low, medium, high, preview, and using them you could turn off some of these checkboxes to lower the quality and make things easier for your system to handle. But actually only the anti-aliasing and GPU acceleration were for quality. When you turn off paths, fills, strokes, effects, images, and masks, you're not lowering the quality, you're hiding things. And that's why Moho 14 uses the name display instead of display quality. In the past, you had to go to display quality to turn on and off some of these options, whereas now we have most of them in front of us. In Moho 13.5, to turn off your paths, you could use this option or that one. The option that you had here was an icon and its checkbox was on the left of it, and some of the users got confused because they thought maybe this icon and its checkbox were actually two options. Amazingly, they updated this option in Moho 14. You can now click on the icon itself to turn it on or off. So instead of two things, now you're dealing with one. And when you hold your mouse on it in Moho 14, just like Moho 13.5, it says show curves. And I assume Moho developers will watch this video. So hey developer, if you're watching this video, I just wanted to say this tooltip for the option is wrong, because if you show it, the next time that you click on it, it will be hidden and you're not showing anything. In Moho 13.5, there were two options, images and smooth images, while in Moho 14, we only have one option called images. For example, here in Moho 13.5, we have two images, one on the right and the other on the left. If I double click on the layer of the right one and type 50 for its opacity and click on OK, it will be transparent. If you uncheck smooth images and images, all of your images will be hidden. If you check images and then uncheck GPU acceleration, none of your images will be transparent. While GPU acceleration and smooth images are not checked, by unchecking images, you can still hide all of your images. If you only check smooth images and uncheck images and GPU acceleration, you'll have all of your images and your transparent images will be transparent. By turning it off, all of your images will be hidden, and while GPU acceleration is checked and images is not checked, checking smooth images will show you all of your images with correct transparency, and unchecking smooth images will hide all of them. In this table, you can see a summary of what I just told you, and I'm sure the programmers themselves had a hard time memorizing all of these possibilities themselves. To make it simpler to understand, instead of images and smooth images, now we have only one option in Moho 14 called images. This option has nothing to do with your transparency anymore, and using it you can only turn your images on or off. Then you may ask, what happened to the ability that we had that allowed us to show our images with or without transparency? Well, it hasn't been removed, and now we have an option that does this for us. It's called layer effects, and using it, not only you can show or hide your transparency, but also you can use it to ignore blur radius, outline, colorizing, and your blending. That's why we call it layer effects. Rather than images, in Moho 13.5, there was another option called transparency. It was for showing or hiding the transparency of your vector layers. When GPU acceleration is checked, that option is gray, meaning that it will be considered as on, and you can't turn it off. So to use it in Moho 13.5, you had to turn your GPU acceleration off. There are two ways to make your shapes transparent in Moho. One way is to go to layer settings, and then you can reduce the value of opacity. This will make all shapes of your vector layer transparent, and then you can go to display quality and uncheck transparency to ignore the transparency of your layer. Alternatively, you can reduce your alpha value, and this way you can draw different shapes with different transparencies in a layer. And as you can see in Moho 13.5, transparency checkbox works for both of them. Now in Moho 14, I'm going to use the first method to make a layer transparent, and then I'm going to use the second method to draw a transparent shape. Although in Moho 14 we don't have transparency checkbox, to ignore the transparency of your layers, you can turn off your GPU caching, and then you click on layer effects. So unlike Moho 13.5, in Moho 14, you can only ignore the transparency of your layers and not the alpha value of your shapes. GPU acceleration has been renamed to GPU caching, and it's been improved. And by improved, I mean a lot. Also, it is worth mentioning that in Moho 13.5, when you go to Edit and then Preferences, in your General tab, you'll see an option called Enable GPU. To understand what this checkbox does, first you should know that usually if your system supports your graphic processing unit or GPU, your GPU will process everything by itself. But if your system is old or your GPU is outdated, your central processing unit or CPU will handle everything. Of course, using GPU is better because if you use it, your CPU will have some time to do the other tasks. So in Moho 13.5, enabling this checkbox allowed your system to use your GPU. However, we don't have that option in Moho 14. I guess it's because choosing between GPU and CPU will be done automatically. Now I'm gonna talk about the differences between GPU acceleration and GPU caching. First, let's talk about improvements. In Moho 13.5, whenever you uncheck GPU acceleration, your image layers will lose their quality. You can clearly see the pixels here, and this is when you check GPU acceleration. But in Moho 14, you don't have this problem. Let me zoom in. This is with GPU caching, and this is without GPU caching. Literally no difference. Here in Moho 13.5, I'm gonna zoom out. Let's take a look at our image. It doesn't have a high quality. Now let's test it in Moho 14. Wow, it's way better. In Moho 13.5, when you turn on your GPU acceleration, the shapes of your vector layers will lose their quality. See, the vertical lines are not as thick as the horizontal lines. Now, if we test the same thing in Moho 14, you can see that the quality of the shapes of our vector layers will remain, which shows you how powerful Moho 14 is. When you play your animation in Moho 13.5, your curves will be polygon, but in Moho 14 they will remain the same. And it means that you can play your animation in Moho 14 with high quality even before you render. In Moho 13.5, after applying soft edge effect on a shape, you have to select another layer to see it. But in Moho 14, even before you apply that effect, you can see the result of your changes in real time before you confirm. Now let's see what happens to drop shadow effect in Moho 13.5. As you can see, in order to see it, we have to apply that effect and then select the other layers, which makes it really hard to work with. While in Moho 14, we can see drop shadow effect on our shape even before we apply it on our shape. And we can say the same thing about splotch effect. In Moho 13.5, you have to select the other layers to see it, but in Moho 14, there is no need to select the other layers. And you can see the result of your changes as you're changing the value of your effect. In Moho 13.5, if you use checker selection and give your shape a brush, as soon as you select it, the fill of that shape and its brush will be checkered. However, in Moho 14, when you give your shape a brush, only the fill of your shape will be checkered. And to show you that your brush is selected, Moho is gonna draw a red rectangle around it, just like when you turn off your checker selection. The reason that they did this is that in Moho 13.5, since everything was checkered, if you wanted to change the color of your brush or change the stroke of it, you couldn't see the result very well. But in Moho 14, there is no checker for brushes and we only have a red rectangle. And we don't need to deselect our shape to see the changes of the brush. Also, if among of the shapes that you select there is a brush, you'll see a red rectangle around all of the selected shapes. However, this feature that I'm talking about in Moho 14 doesn't work very well, and there is a bug with it that I'm showing to you right now, and I don't know why this problem happens, but sometimes for an example like this, you're not gonna see the red rectangle. So maybe the programmers of Moho 14 can answer this question. As you know, when we use a brush in Moho, we're creating a series of images next to each other. We call every one of those images stamp. In Moho 13.5, if you wanted to rotate your stamps through your animation, you had to uncheck an option called minimize frame to frame randomness. But you couldn't see the rotation actually in real time, and you had to render your project to see it. In Moho 14, they changed the name to line boil, but this time to apply the rotation to your stamps, instead of unchecking it, you have to check the line boil, and then you'll see it in real time. Now it's time to talk about the improvements of stroke effects. For the soft edge effect, although in Moho 13.5 you had to select the other layers to see the effect, in Moho 14 you can see soft edge effect even before you apply it on your shapes. Now let's talk about graphic improvements of the layer settings. In Moho 13.5, in order to see the colorizing effect, you had to select the other layers. Or for example, for outline effect, you had to select the other layers to see it. Or for blending, you couldn't see it at all unless you rendered your project. Or you could see the opacity, but after you clicked on OK. Or you could only see the layers with blur effect when the other layers were selected. And it got on your nerves to have all of these features but not be able to see them. However, in Moho 14, all of them can be seen even before you apply them on your layers. I'm sure since you couldn't see most of them, you didn't use them. But now without searching about it or reading about it in the user manual, you can just see what happens. Also, when it comes to groups, Moho 13.5 will be literally dead. To see the colorizing, you have to render it. To see the outline effect, you have to render it. To see the blendings, you have to render it. Also, to see the opacity, you have to render it. And to see the blur effect, you have to render it. But in Moho 14, just like the powerful system that you have for showing the effects of your layers, you can change all of them and see the result even before you apply them on your groups. Now let's move to Shadows tab. In Moho 13.5, if you check Layer Shadow for your groups or for your layers, in order to see your shadows, you have to render your project. But in Moho 14, as soon as you check or uncheck this option, you'll see the result in your workspace, either for your layers or for your groups. Next, we have Vectors tab. In Moho 13.5, if you check Allow Animated Layer Effects and then check Noisy Outlines and then Animated Noise, you will not be able to see the animation of your outline unless you render it. But in Moho 14, if you check all of them for a layer, you'll see the animated noisy effect for all of the shapes of your layer. In Moho 13.5, when you enable depth of field, you only can see the result when you render. But in Moho 14, when the project settings window is opened, if you check enabled, you can see the result in real time only for the shapes that are selected at the moment and not the ones that are not selected. So when you want to apply depth of field, first using Ctrl or Shift is better to select all of your layers, and after that you go to project settings and apply depth of field. This way you will be able to see the result in your workspace for all of the layers. In Moho 13.5, let's say we have a red shape in a layer and a yellow shape in another layer, and then we group them and then create another layer on top of it with a new shape and then group the whole thing. If we mask our first group and then mask our second group, we will have a mask inside another mask. And although the result in workspace is wrong, if we render, we can see the actual result. But in Moho 14, if we try to create the same project with two layers inside a group and that group and another layer inside another group, if we mask both of the groups, you can see that the result is correct in our workspace. So they fixed the bug. Now you can have a mask inside another mask goes to infinity. And the last improvement is for scripts. If you go to scripts, particle effects, an explosion, and create an explosion effect and then render it, you can see that the result that you see in your render is really different from what you see in your workspace. But in Moho 14, compared to our render, we only have less particles. But how we see our particles in our workspace is just like what we see in our render. Now let's talk about the things that haven't been improved in Moho 14. Like Moho 13.5, if you have some vector layers in Moho 14, by selecting one of them, you'll lose the quality of the shapes of the other layers. But if you uncheck GPU caching, the problem will be gone. In Moho 13.5, using color points tool, you can create gradient by choosing color for points. I'm gonna create a gradient and then render it, so then I can compare it with the same project in Moho 14. After creating the same shape, I'm gonna render it in Moho 14, and now we compare both of them with each other. As you can see, this new system is very different from the previous one. In Moho 13.5, the gradients created by color points tool were only based on the position of the points. But in Moho 14, rather than the position of the points, the position of control points of the busy handles also have some effects on how Moho is gonna show you the gradient. And here the problem with Moho 14 is that, what if someone wants to use the system in Moho 13.5? I mean, both of these systems can be useful in certain situations. So why not giving us the ability to use both of them in Moho 14, not just one? Now let's talk about the problems of the fill effects in Moho 14. In Moho 13.5, when we want to apply a shaded effect on a shape, we can see the changes of our effect even before we apply it. But in Moho 14, we have lost this ability. We have to apply it and then select another layer so we can see it. Also in Moho 14, in order to see the effects such as halo, crayon, and spots for a layer, you still have to select the other layers. If I want to talk about the brushes in Moho 14, you can't see the result of merge alpha option unless you render it. And now it's time to talk about the problems with stroke effects in Moho 14. If you want to apply shaded effect on a shape in Moho 13.5, you can see the result even before you apply that effect on a shape. But in Moho 14, for some reason, in order to see the result for your layer, you need to select another layer. Also, just like Moho 13.5, in Moho 14, in order to see the halo effect for a layer, you need to select another layer. In Moho 13.5, if you apply a splotch effect on a shape, in order to see it, you have to select another layer. If I zoom in, you can see it. In Moho 14, although you can see the effect even before you apply it, when you hit OK and apply that effect, you'll see the effect on a shape. But as soon as you select another layer, the effect will be gone. So personally, I think it's a bug. Also in Moho 14, to see the effects such as spots, sketchy and angled pen for a layer, you still need to select another layer. And just like Moho 13.5, in Moho 14 you can't see motion blur effect in real time unless you render it. And just like Moho 13.5, in Moho 14 you still can't see layer shading effect or 3D shadow effect unless you render them. So these were the features and problems of GPU caching. And now I think we're done with GPU caching, and it's time to talk about what happened to anti-aliasing, because we don't have it in Moho 14. Normally in a graphic software, when you draw something, you're gonna see some pixels around it. But in Moho 13.5, you can uncheck GPU acceleration and then check anti-aliasing to see them smooth. Anti-aliasing in Moho 14 is always on. I mean, you're not gonna see any pixel around any shape. Also, you should know that the anti-aliasing that we have in display quality has nothing to do with your render. It's just a way of showing your project to you in your workspace. But if you really want to disable it for your project, one way is that you can go to the layer settings of your layers and then vectors tab, and after that you can disable it for that layer, or you can go to file, project settings and disable it for the whole project. Both of them can be done in 13.5 and 14. We also have an icon for flipping your canvas. It's just the same option that we have in drop-down menu. However, there is a bug with it. If you flip a shape and then click to split your views or press home key on your keyboard or reset your view will be reset, but the icon will remain on. And now let's talk about the improvements of timeline window. In Moho 13.5, there was an option called Hide Timeline Options Toolbar, and using that option you could hide all of the options at the top of your timeline so you could have more space. And after that, if you wanted to use them, you could just click on that option again. It wasn't a really useful option. So I think that's why they decided to remove it in Moho 14. Let's say we are not on the frame 0 and we want to change the color of our shape. If we change the color of our shape to another color, it will create a keyframe for it. But for the frames before that, we won't have the same color. And you know that if we want to change the color of our shape for the entire animation, we have to change our color when we are on the frame 0. And let's say we are working on a frame 24. Maybe we're giving our character a special pose, for example. So to do something like this, first we have to go back to frame 0, change the color, and then go back to frame 24. And see, in this example, we have to memorize that we are on the frame 24. But in Moho 13.5, we have an option to do this called Design Mode, and the shortcut is Ctrl-Shift-D. The first time that you choose this option, Moho will memorize your current frame and then goes back to frame 0. And the second time that you click on it, Moho goes back to the memorized frame. That's why we call it Design Mode, because we use it to quickly add something to our design and then go back to our current frame. In Moho 14, we have the same option, but the name of it has been changed to Toggle Frame 0. I think because the previous name showed us when we could use it, but this new name shows us what it does, which makes it better for a user to understand. Also, an icon has been added for it in your timeline window, so you can use it faster than before. Also, channels, sequencer, and motion graph have been converted into an icon in Moho 14. Usually having an icon is better than having a text. Also, if you want to know the name of them, you can just hold your mouse on them and then you'll see the name of them inside the tooltip. There is an option in Moho 13.5 called Onion Skins. This option helps you to see the frames before your current frame or after your current frame without moving your playhead. First, you need to turn it on, and then you'll see some markers in this area such as this one. Also, you can click anywhere on this area to create your own marker. And anywhere you put the marker of your onion skin other than your current frame, you'll be able to see that frame simultaneously. So now, because the marker that we have is before our current frame, the color of it is red. So red means past. And if we create a keyframe after our playhead, the color of it will be green, and green means future. The problem in Moho 13.5 is that if we have a red shape or a green shape, we won't be able to see our onion skin very clear. And that's why in Moho 14 you have the ability to change the color of your onion skins. So when their colors are similar to your shapes, you can just choose a different color. In Moho 13.5, relative keyframing and out-of-Rreeze keys were here, whereas now in Moho 14, relative keyframing is here and out-of-Rreeze keys is here. In the draw drop-down menu of Moho 13.5, you had an option called Freeze Visible Points. Using that option, you could create a keyframe for all of the possible channels of the points that were not hidden at the place of your playhead. We also had a similar option for the bones in Bone drop-down menu of Moho 13.5 to create a keyframe for the bones that were not hidden called Freeze Visible Bones. In Moho 14, rather than having them in drop-down menus, now we have both of them at the top of the timeline as one icon. Then you may ask, how will Moho do both of them? Well, if your selected layer is a bone layer, then Moho will do Freeze Visible Bones. And if you have selected a vector layer, Moho will do the Freeze Visible Points. In Moho 13.5, when you had some keyframes for some points on the frame 0 and you wanted to copy those keyframes into your current frame, you had to do it manually. So first you had to select those points, then select the keyframes of them on the frame 0, hit Ctrl+C to copy them, and then Ctrl+V to paste them into your current frame. And it took a lot of time. But we have a new option in Moho 14 called Reset Visible Points and Bones that allows us to copy the keyframes that we have on the frame 0 for the points and bones that are not hidden into our current frame. So when you click on it, if a bone layer is selected, it will do the Reset Visible Bones, and if a vector layer is selected, it will do the Reset Visible Points. To use it, first hide the points or bones that you don't want to copy their keyframes into your current frame, and then click on Reset Visible Points and Bones. Let me hit Ctrl+Z, or you can use the option in drop-down menu. And after you do this, if you want to work with the hidden bones and points, you can go to Draw drop-down menu or Bone drop-down menu and show them again. In Moho 13.5, to change the interpolation of a keyframe, one way was to right click on it and then you could change it. The other way was to go to Windows, Keyframe, and then you could change it from there. But as you can see, this option was called Default Interpolation. Using it, you couldn't change the interpolation of the keyframes that you had, but you could set an interpolation for the keyframes that you wanted to create. You can clearly see that that selected keyframe is still smooth and not linear. But now if I create a keyframe, it will be linear. But in Moho 14, if you have selected a keyframe, that option will be red, and if you click on it, you'll see that it's called interpolation, and using it you can change the interpolation of your keyframes. In Moho 14, methods such as right-clicking on your keyframe or going to Windows and Keyframe will still work. Also, using this new icon, you can open your keyframe dialog faster, and when no keyframe is selected, this option will be white, and using it you can set an interpolation for the keyframes that you want to create. Also in Moho 13.5, this value was always white, and it was for the interval value of the keyframes that you wanted to create. But now in Moho 14, when you select some keyframes, it will be red, and using it you can change the interval value of them. In Moho 13.5, to move your keyframes to the right or left, you had to select them and move them manually. But in Moho 14 we have an option for it, so you don't need to select your keyframes. And now because this number is 2, if you click on Push Frames Right, all of the keyframes at the place of your playhead, and after it will move 2 frames to the right, or you can click on Push Frames Left to move them 2 frames to the left. And you can change this number. For example, we type 24, and then we can push them 24 frames forward or backward. In Moho 13.5, to create a marker, we use this option, but now in Moho 14, we use this one. Here in Moho 13.5, we have some channels for this layer, and if we go to another layer, you can see that we have some other channels. Now I go back to the previous layer, right-click on one of the channels, and choose Consolidate Layer Channels. As you can see, I combined them, and now I'm dealing with one channel only. But I did this only to one layer. If I go back to the previous layer, you can see that I still have multiple channels. So I can consolidate the channels of this layer as well. Now let me unconsolidate both of these layers. This time I go to Animation and then choose Consolidate Layer Channels. And as you can see, the result of this option is different because now we have consolidated all of the channels of all of the layers. And now let me uncheck it again, and to consolidate the channels of all of these layers again, alternatively you can go to Edit, Preferences, and then you go to Timeline tab and check this checkbox. And this will also consolidate the channels of all of the layers. In Moho 14, to consolidate the channels of all of the layers, there is a faster way, and that is you can just click on this option, and then the channels of each layer will be consolidated. And there is a very small bug, and that is if you use the other methods now to unconsolidate them, the option should be off. However, it is still on. There is also a new option in Moho 14 for when you have created some keyframes for your camera that you can click on it to hide your camera channels. It just gives you more space when you have a lot of channels. Also, if you have created some markers, if they are annoying to you, you can click on this option to hide them. And the last change in timeline toolbar is that in Moho 13.5 we use these two mountains to zoom in or zoom out in our timeline, and some users didn't know which one was for zoom in and which one was for zoom out. Therefore they changed their icons in Moho 14 so every user will understand what they do. In Moho 13.5, using right arrow key you could go to the next frame, and using left arrow key you could go to the previous frame. Or when multiple keyframes were selected, by holding down the shift key and pressing close bracket, you could jump to the next selected keyframe, and by holding down the shift key and pressing open bracket, you could jump to the previous selected keyframe. In Moho 14 you can use the same shortcuts, and other than them, there are some new shortcuts that you can use. For example, to jump to the next keyframe, whether it's selected or not, you can hold down Alt and press X, and to jump to the previous keyframe you hold down Alt and press Z. Also, if you label some of your keyframes with a color, by holding down the Alt and pressing W, you can jump to the next keyframe that you labeled it with a color, and by holding down the Alt and pressing Q, you can jump to the previous frame that you labeled it with a color. It doesn't matter what color they are. So for example, if you have some keyframes in red and some keyframes in green, using these two shortcuts, you can jump from green to red and red to green, and you won't be able to jump to a single color all the time. In Moho 13.5, when you had whole keyframes, they look like a straight line with some gaps in between, and most of the users didn't know where was the start of them and where was the end of them. In fact, the beginning of every whole keyframe in Moho is at the right side of every gap. Since every keyframe is between two gaps, to scale a keyframe, you just have to hold your mouse close to one of its gaps, and then by dragging, you can scale that keyframe. Either you do it from the right side or the left side. Also, to select a whole keyframe, you could click anywhere between its two gaps, and it would be selected. But in Moho 14, how you see a whole keyframe is completely different from Moho 13.5. Now the straight line is gray, and instead of gaps, we have keyframes. In the past, since your whole keyframes were lined, you didn't know the exact position of them. But in Moho 14, since they are keyframes, the position of them is clear as day. If you click or drag between them, you can't select them. And if you're using frame by frame layers, in order to see the name of your layers, instead of holding your mouse between the gaps, you have to hold your mouse on the keyframes. And to move a keyframe forward or backward, you have to drag on that keyframe. And although in Moho 13.5 all of the whole keyframes are always white, in Moho 14 if you have empty layers for your frame by frame layer, they will be shown in gray, meaning that there is nothing here in this layer. So you don't need to memorize the position of your empty layers in your timeline. Now let's talk about tools. In Moho 13.5, when you choose Add Point tool, you can draw a shape by drawing a series of points. And to create every point you have to drag. Also, using Control, you can draw them sharp or smooth, depending on the sharp corners checkbox. See how I create an edge by dragging? Now if I hold my mouse on that edge and hit Ctrl Z, a red point will be created at the place of my mouse. It's not an actual point and it's a bug. To remove it, you have to create another point, and then it will be gone. Now in Moho 14 I want to test the same thing. I draw a line, hold my mouse on it and hit Ctrl Z. So it hasn't been solved yet. And also I have to say if you change your tool, the problem won't be solved. To make the red point gone, by dragging, draw another edge and hit Ctrl Z. Also if your layer is empty, if you click, move your mouse and hit Ctrl Z, the next time you click, Lower Console window will pop up, showing that there is a bug with the code of this tool. And selecting the other tools won't solve this problem. But if you want to solve it, you can select the Draw Shape tool, draw a shape, then select Add Point tool, and try to double click, and then double click. And then you can hit Ctrl Z or delete that shape, and after that you can use your Add Point tool again. In Moho 14, rather than dragging, you can create your points by just clicking, just like how you draw shapes in Adobe Illustrator. Also in Moho 14, unlike Moho 13.5, by default autofill is off. In Moho 13.5, points are square, but in Moho 14, points are circle. In Moho 13.5, when you use Freehand tool and draw a shape, by holding down the control, you can delete the edges of your shape, just like when you use delete edge tool. But in Moho 14, if you draw a shape using Freehand tool and then hold down control, instead of delete edge tool, eraser tool will be available for you. And then using it, you can erase a part of your shape, just like when you use eraser tool itself. Also, when you use Freehand tool, by holding down Alt, Control and dragging, you can change the size of your eraser. It's very practical when it comes to switch between your Freehand tool and your eraser. Also, it's good to know that using this technique, when you have a stroke without fill, you still can erase a part of it by holding down Control. An amazing update for Freehand tool. In Moho 13.5, for your Freehand tool, you had auto weld, trim start and trim end, but in Moho 14 you don't have any of them, and the reason that they removed them is that in Moho 13.5, to create a shape with fill, you had to connect your endpoint to your start point. But in Moho 14, if you check autofill, as soon as you start to draw, Moho creates your shape. You may say a part of it is not closed, but it's actually closed. If you select hide edge tool and click on that edge, you can see that it's just a hidden edge. If you want to do the same thing in Moho 13.5, to close your shape automatically, you have to check auto close, and to hide your last edge, you have to check hide auto closed segment. And if you want to show your last edge, you can uncheck it. But sometimes it had a bug, and instead of one edge, it created a series of points. But in Moho 14, this bug is solved, and now whenever you release your click, it will be connected to your start point with one edge. However, we don't have any option like auto close in Moho 14, because when you check autofill, your shape will be closed, and we don't have hide auto closed segment in Moho 14, because when you check autofill, your last edge will always be hidden. In Moho 13.5, if you check merge strokes and then draw two different strokes, if you select shape tool and click on one of them, both of them will be selected. And then we can change the color of both of them. But since every time both of them will be selected, we can't change the color of one of them only. If we click on somewhere to deselect the shapes and then uncheck merge strokes, the next time that we draw some shapes, if we click on them using select shape tool, they will be selected individually, and then we can give them different colors. But in Moho 14, we don't have merge strokes, and every time you draw some shapes, you can select them separately and change their colors individually. Also, there is a new option in Moho 14 called multi-stroke fill. If you check it, autofill and weld ends will turn gray, and after that, you can drag and release, drag and release, and drag and release, and it will continue to draw a single shape with some hidden edges in between. And then you may ask, after using multi-stroke fill to create a shape, how can we create a new shape? There are two ways. One way is to uncheck and then check multi-stroke fill, and this time let me uncheck auto stroke, and then you can draw a new shape. So with no auto stroke, you can still use multi-stroke fill. Another way to create a new shape is that you can select shape tool and then click on somewhere to deselect the shape, and then you go back to Freehand tool and draw your new shape. And let me uncheck and check multi-stroke, and I also want to check auto stroke this time. As you can see, if I drag, everything is okay, and Moho will connect our last point to our first point. But if we try to drag from this side, there will be a gap in the middle of our shape. I'm gonna hit Ctrl Z. So it's better to always draw from somewhere closer to your last point instead of somewhere closer to your first point. Now let's talk about Blob Brush. In Moho 13.5, you can't see your strokes until you finish your drawing, and unfortunately this problem is still there in Moho 14, so you can't see your strokes until you finish your drawing. In Moho 13.5, if you hold down the control to erase your shape, it changes the other parts of your shape. However, in Moho 14, if you erase a part of your shape, it won't ruin the other parts. In Moho 13.5, when you were using eraser tool, while you were dragging, if your mouse went out of your workspace and you release the click, it would draw instead of erasing. But they fixed the problem in Moho 14. And unlike Moho 13.5, by default auto stroke is off for Blob Brush. Now it's time to talk about select shape tool. In Moho 14 there is a feature called liquid shape, and to show you how to use it, first I'm gonna draw some shapes. I also write the order of them for you on the screen. As you can see, when we select shape tool, there are some new features on top, and since we drew this rectangle first, it's at the back of all of the shapes, and normally if you select a shape it will be normal, but now I want to select my red shape and choose add. And now you can see that my rectangle is not a rectangle anymore, and my circle has been added to a rectangle. And also it has the same color as our rectangle. So when you have a normal shape like this rectangle, and you have another shape like this circle on top of it, if you click on add for the circle, you will create a liquid shape group. This liquid shape group now has two shapes. If you look at the order of the shapes, the first shape that we have at the back of all of the shapes in our liquid shape group must be normal, and we call it base shape. The rest of the shapes in your liquid shape group must not be normal. So now to add the triangle and the star to our liquid shape group, we have to change them from normal to something else. For the triangle, I'm going to choose subtract, and for the star, I'm going to choose clip. See how the color of a star remained because we chose clip for it. So while Moho changes the color of your added shapes to the color of your base shape, for the shapes that you choose clip for them, the color of them will remain. Also, when you select the shape, you can see the order of it in your liquid shape group. Other than that, the number on the right shows you how many shapes you have in your liquid shape group. If you change the width of a clipped shape in your liquid shape group or change its color, it won't have any effect on the width of the other shapes in your liquid shape group. But changing the color or the width of the other shapes in your liquid shape group, such as subtract, add, or normal, will change all of the other added, subtracted, or normal shapes in your liquid shape group. I'm gonna move all of them a bit so you can see how they react to the other shapes in this liquid shape group. Also, you should know that added, subtracted, and clipped shapes can be completely inside your base shape. I'm gonna hit Ctrl A to select all of the points and Ctrl C and V to make a copy of it. Let me move this new liquid shape group to the bottom, and then I'm gonna flip it. After that, I draw a rectangle on top of all of them. I want to draw it to cover a part of the base shape of my first liquid shape group. After that, I select it, and then I choose add for it, so I can add it to the base shape of my first liquid shape group. However, it won't be added. What I'm telling you is that being a part of a liquid shape group is not about the position of your shape. It's all about the order of them and also the type that you choose. And by type, I mean add, subtract, clip, and normal. And now since our shape is on top of our second liquid shape group, it's actually a part of it. Let me show you. If we move it down here, you can see that it will be added to the base shape of our second liquid shape group. To add it to our first liquid shape group, first select the select shape tool, make sure your shape is selected, and then by hitting down arrow key on your keyboard, you change its order to send it to the back of the base shape of the second liquid shape group. And now as you can see, it's been added to our first liquid shape group. While the points of that rectangle are selected, using Ctrl and Shift, I'm gonna add my second liquid shape group to my selection and hit the delete key to delete all of them. Then using the select shape tool, I'm gonna select my base shape. And since it's normal, the value of blend is in gray. Also for clipped shapes, we can't change the value of blend. But for an added shape like this circle, we can change the value of blend to blend it with the shapes that we have below it. And I said below it because it had effect on the base shape, but it didn't have any effect on the triangle. Also for a subtracted shape like this triangle, we can change the value of blend. And just like added, it will have effect on all of the shapes below it. So now you know that when we have some added and subtracted shapes in our liquid shape group, the blend value of the added or subtracted shape that is at the top of the other ones will be our actual blend value. And Moho will ignore the blend value of the shapes below it. Also, you should know that the blend value of your liquid shape group has nothing to do with your clipped shapes. Here in this example, I'm going to draw 3 circles. I want to leave the first one to be normal, and then I choose add for the second one and subtract for the third one. Now if I select my second shape, you can see that its order is 2, and I'm going to hit up arrow key to move it to the top. See how it comes over the subtracted shape, and its order is 3 now, and the order of this one is 2. What I'm telling you is that they will be subtracted from your base shape and added to your base shape based on their orders. Now I draw another shape, and let's select it and choose clip for it, and the order of it is 4 now, and I'm gonna hit down arrow key to send it between our added and subtracted shapes. And as you can see, clipped shapes don't follow the orders of your shapes. They will be always on top of all of your layers. And also in Moho 14 there is a bug with liquid shapes. If in a liquid shape you have a clipped shape with the order of 2, I'm going to hit down arrow key once more to send it to the order of 2. You can see that while we still have our clipped shape, our added and subtracted shapes are gone. So hey you programmer of Moho, if you're watching this video, please fix this problem, because this liquid shape feature is amazing. In this example, we draw a circle at the center, and then we draw some circles around it. Then using select shape tool, we select all of them except the circle at the center and choose clip. And as you can see, in this case, selecting the base shape is really hard because there are a lot of shapes in front of it. To select it, we can just select one of the other shapes, and you can see that we have two options up here. The left one is called select bottom of liquid shape. And if we click on it, see the order here, the base of our liquid shape will be selected. And then we can change its color or change the width of its stroke. Then I'm gonna select some of my clipped shapes and change them to add or subtract. And as you can see, this is the top shape of my liquid shape group. And you know that to change the blend value of your liquid shape, you need to change the blend value of your top shape. But sometimes, like this example, you have a lot of shapes and it's hard to find it. But in Moho 14, we have an option for that. Just select one of your shapes and click on this option. We call it select top of liquid shape, and it will find it. And then you will have the chance to change the value of blend for all of your shapes. Of course, except clipped ones. Also, I want you to know that in this example, our top shape is an added shape or subtracted shape. If your top shape is a clipped shape, you know that since for normal shapes and clipped shapes, we don't have a blend value, you can't use this technique. Also, when you click on select top or bottom of liquid shape, for no reason they will be turned on or off. And it's actually a bug and have to be fixed. Now in this example, I'm gonna show you how you can draw multiple liquid shape groups. First, draw some shapes, keep one of them normal and change the other ones to add, subtract and clip. And then you will have your first liquid shape group. Adjust its blend value if you want. And then you draw some new shapes. Obviously, since I'm drawing them after my liquid shape, they're all gonna be on top of my liquid shape. Then again, just leave one of them to be normal and change the other ones to add, subtract and clip. And then you select the added or subtracted shape on top. You can make sure it's on top by checking the order, and then you can change the blend value of your liquid shape group. After that, I select transform points tool, then I hold down the control and drag to select the points of my second liquid shape and move it to my first liquid shape, and you can see that they are separated. So now we have two liquid shape groups. What makes them separated? The normal shapes. So every time you have a normal shape, it will be considered as one liquid shape group. Now I'm going to talk about what can be animated in a liquid shape group. The only thing that can be animated is the value of blend. Once you change it, you'll see its channel and some keyframes and it will be animated. And you just have to use your creativity to create your favorite animations. But unfortunately in Moho 14 you can't animate the type of your shapes. So for example, let's say this shape is subtracted on the frame 0. And the thing is, if you go to another frame and make it clipped, it won't add any keyframe for it. So throughout your timeline, you can't switch between being normal, added, subtracted, or clipped. Here in this example, I have a base shape on the left, and I want to make the right one added. And now let's talk about merge button. While my added shape is selected, I'm gonna click on merge, or I can hit Ctrl Z and select my base shape and click on merge. And whenever we merge something, there will be one single shape. And that shape will be normal. This time let me choose subtract for the right shape. So when a subtracted shape is selected, we can merge them. Let me hit Ctrl Z. And when a base shape is selected, we still can merge them. This time I want to add another shape and make it added. So now we have a normal shape, a subtracted shape and an added shape. And while my added shape is selected, I'm just gonna hit down arrow key to send it at the back of the subtracted shape. Now the order of the added shape is 2 and the order of the subtracted shape is 3. And no matter which one you select and click on merge, it will be merged correctly. Now we have one single shape and it is normal. Now in this example, we have a normal shape on the left and a clipped shape on the right. First, while my clipped shape is selected, I'm gonna choose merge and it will be merged correctly, but let me show you something. When you merge a clipped shape, the extra part of it that is outside of the base shape will be removed. However, it will still be a separated shape. Also in this case, if we select the normal shape and click on merge, nothing's gonna happen. And as you can see, the path of our clipped shape will be still there. And also there is a bug. If we select our clipped shape with another shape and then click on merge, instead of clipping, it's gonna be added to our base shape. And in this example, we're going to take one step further. We have a normal, an added, a subtracted, and a clipped shape. If you select the added shape and click on merge, all of them will be merged correctly, but this won't merge your clipped shape. If you select the subtracted shape and click on merge, Again, the same thing happens. All of them will be merged correctly, but your clip shape will remain unchanged. See, if I move it, it's just the same shape as before. And the same thing happens when we select our base shape and click on merge. So the only way to merge a clipped shape is that we have to make sure we only select that clipped shape and then we click on merge. And this only merges the clipped shape and not the other shapes. Let me hit Ctrl Z. This time I want to check if the bug is still there. So I select my clipped shape with another shape and click on merge. And you can see that instead of clipping, it's going to be added to our base shape. And I know that it might be confusing, but when you look at this table, everything will be easier to understand. When you have a clip shape on top and normal shape at the bottom and some added and subtracted shapes in between, if you want to merge normal, added and subtracted shapes with each other, you just have to select one of them. And if you want to merge the clip shape, you have to only select the clip shape. And to avoid the bug, you just have to make sure you don't select the other shapes with your clipped shape. See, it wasn't that hard. What was hard is that I even took one more step further and tested the merge button in all possible ways. So don't panic, I'm not gonna explain this experiment for you, but as I tested it more and more, I found out that this merge button has a lot of bugs, and luckily I found a way to avoid all of these bugs. But before I show you the solution, I'm gonna show you when these bugs happen, so when you face them you would be able to understand where these bugs come from. Here is the result of my test. In this example, I have a normal shape at the bottom, then some added and subtracted shapes on top of it. Then I have a clipped shape, and then I have some added and subtracted shapes on top of it. Then there is another clipped shape, and then again I have some other added and subtracted shapes on top of it. I wrote the bugs in purple and you can see we have a lot of them. So now I'm going to show you these bugs. The first bug that we have says it will be merged, but there is a bug and that is its path will remain. So for example here this shape is subtracted and this shape is added, and now I'm going to select this added shape here and then I click on merge. Let me select transform points tool to see what happened. Although the subtracted and added shape on the right have been merged, we still have their path. If I move them, you can see that these are their paths, but the shape themselves have been merged. And as you know, to merge a clipped shape, we have to only select that clipped shape, and Moho should only merge that one. However, Moho will merge some of the other ones, and also some of them will be copied. For example, here this shape is clipped, this one is subtracted, this one is added, and this one is also subtracted, and also this one is added. Now I'm gonna select my clipped shape and click on merge, and since every time you click on merge your shape will be normal, I'm gonna hit up arrow key to move it to the top so you can see it better. And now let's select transform points tool to see what happened. Let me move my shape to the right. And as I said, when we select a clipped shape, only the clipped shape should be merged. But as you can see, the subtracted and the added shape that we had in the middle have been merged with our clipped shape. Also, the subtracted shape and the added shape that we had on the right have been merged with our clipped shape. And let me show you something. If I move them, you can see that they are still there. And Moho copied them. So this thing that we have right now is actually a copied version of them that have been merged with our clipped shape. And the last bug is about a subtracted shape that will be changed to an added shape. So as you can see here, I have a subtracted shape. If we select it and click on merge, it will be changed to an added shape. Now I'm going to show you how to use liquid shape group without facing a bug. These bugs happen because you don't draw your clipped shapes on top. So you should draw them on top of added and subtracted shapes. So for example here I want to make this one added and make this one subtracted. And after that I choose clip for my last three shapes. See the number, the last shape is on top, all of the clipped shapes are on top. So now I select one of the clipped shapes and click on merge. And since it will be normal, let me move up arrow key to move it to the top. And as you can see, we only merged that clip shape and it has nothing to do with the rest of the shapes. Let me hit Ctrl Z, or for example, maybe you want to merge this clipped shape. And as you can see, we only merged that one and it's completely separated from the other ones. And to do the merging for normal, add or subtract, you just have to select one of them and click on merge. And they'll be all merged except our clipped shapes. See, we still have our clipped shapes and can move them individually, but the rest of them have been all merged. See, if I move them, they're just one shape. Now in this last example, I'm going to show you two different methods to subtract a small rectangle from a big rectangle and subtract a small circle from a big circle. For the first one, I'm going to use liquid shape feature. So I select my small rectangle, then I choose subtract, and after that I click on merge. For the rectangles on the right, I'm going to choose another method. So first, using select points tool, I'm going to select all of their points, and then I select weld crossing. After that, I choose delete edge tool and delete the extra edges. And using delete shape tool, I'm going to delete all of the shapes. Then using create shape tool, I'm going to select all of the points, and then I click on create shape. Actually, the method that I've just used is older, and you can use it in Moho 13.5, 13 and 12. Again, for the circles on the left, I'm going to use liquid shape feature. And then for the circles on the right, I'm going to choose select points tool, select all of them and choose weld crossing. Then using delete edge tool, I'm going to delete the extra edges. But here, because we have a curve, you have to be careful, because if we delete that last edge, it will ruin our circle. Instead, we can select transform points tool and then select that last point and hit the delete key. And using delete shape tool, we delete all of them. And finally, using create shape tool, we select all of the points and then click on create shape. To conclude, I have to say, if your shape has a curve, the older method is really time consuming, so it's better to use liquid shape method because it's really fast. But for the shapes with no curve, although the older method is a bit time consuming, it doesn't ruin your shape. But if you use liquid shape feature, while it's faster, it will ruin some parts of your shape. So now you know that when it's better to use the older method and when it's better to use the liquid shape feature. Although I mentioned some bugs for liquid shapes, working with liquid shape is not that hard. So for example, let's say we have a circle and we have another circle here. If we hit Q, select this one and choose add, I can hit the T key and move it to here. And if I deselect the shape, you can see that it will be added to it. We can select it and increase the blend value. And now if I move it, we can have this cool effect. Also, I can hit Q and choose subtract. So now it's like we are pushing the other one. See? Or you can choose clip. Now, if I hit the T key and move it, you can see that we've clipped this shape inside the other one. So now I'm going to hit Ctrl A and hit the delete key to delete all of them. Then I choose circle and drag to draw a circle. By holding down the shift key, you can make sure you're drawing a circle. Then I'm going to hit the T key, hit Ctrl C and then V to make a copy of it. By holding down the shift key, I'm going to move it horizontally and put it here. Again, I'm going to hit Ctrl C and V and make some copies. Again, I'm going to hit Ctrl C and V and put a circle here. Then I'm going to increase its size. By holding down the Alt, you can increase it from the center. After that, I hit Q, select this one, and by holding down the shift key, I'm going to add these ones to my selection. I'm going to leave this one to be unselected because I want this shape to be my normal shape or my base shape. So I can then add these ones to my base shape. Now again, I hit the S key to select the draw shape tool, and by holding down the shift key, I'm going to draw a circle. Then I'm going to hit the T key, Ctrl C and V to make a copy of it. By holding down the Alt key, I can decrease the size of this new circle from the center. Then I'm going to hit Q, select this circle at the back of it and give it a white color. And for this one, I'm going to choose a black color. Then I hit the T key, scroll up to zoom in, hold down the shift key and click inside the white circle. Then I press home key on my keyboard to reset my view and move this eye to here. Next, I'm going to hit Q and go to draw and choose lower to back. To send the black part to the back of all of the shapes, I'm going to do the same thing with the white part. Now I'm going to hit the T key, hold down the Ctrl and press C and then V to make a copy of it. After that, I move this eye to here and increase its size. By holding down the Alt key, you can increase its size from the center. It's very big, let me make it smaller. After that, I can hit Q, select this shape and add some blend value to it. And then I can, for example, draw a triangle, hit Q, select it, and choose subtract. I'm going to hit down arrow key a couple of times so that instead of being a part of this liquid shape group, my triangle will be a part of this one. Then I'm going to hit the T key, rotate it, and move it to here. After that, I hit the A key and drag on here. And again, I'm going to drag on this one. Then I'm going to hit the T key, and you can adjust its position. If you want to hide your paths, you can click on here And now we have something like this. And for the eyes, I can select them by holding down the Shift key and choose Clip. So now if I hit the T key, select this one, hold down the Shift key and add this one to my selection, you can see that they will be clipped inside the white part of the eye. I'm gonna hit Ctrl Z and then you can animate them. For example, we can go to this frame and move the eyes. I'm gonna hold down the Control and click on somewhere to deselect them. And then I click on here to put a keyframe for the mouth. After that, I can go to frame 48 and make this worm smile like this. See? Now if I hide the paths, hold down the Control and right click on frame 24 and play my animation, you can see that we created an animation like this. So working with liquid shapes is not that hard. After select shape tool, now it's time to talk about create shape tool. In Moho 13.5 you could only create shape using closed paths, but in Moho 14 there is a new option called connect and create. To use it, if you have a path that is not closed, you select at least one point of it and then click on connect and create, and it will create a shape for you. You can even use this option on multiple open paths. To do it, you just have to select at least one point of every path and then you click on connect and create. However, they will be considered as one shape, so you can change the color of one of them only. Also, there is a small bug. Let's say we have a closed path. If we select at least one point of it and then click on connect and create, all of its points will be selected but there will be no shape. And the bug is that the create shape option will be gray. To fix this problem, you just have to deselect and reselect your shape, and then you can click on create shape to create your shape. And to avoid this bug, you just have to remember never use connect and create on closed shapes. Now let's talk about paint bucket tool. Let's say in Moho 13.5 we draw a path that is almost closed but not actually closed. So let me zoom in for you. You can see that there is a gap here. Using paint bucket, if I click in the middle of my path, you can see that it just fit my path into my view, but nothing else is gonna happen. This time I'm gonna zoom out and go far away and then click in the middle. Now if I move it to the right, you can see that this new shape has its own path apart from the path that we've drawn. This time I hit Ctrl Z and go really far away from my shape, more than before, and then click in the middle. And now if I move this new shape, you can see that the path of it is the same as our path. So the idea of this method is, if you have a shape that is almost closed, if you go far enough, using paint bucket tool you can close it. But why we can't do it when we are not far enough? As you remember, we had a gap between 2 points. When you use paint bucket tool, as soon as Moho reaches one of these points, since there is no edge, it tries to search for the other point. But to do that, Moho has to search all of the pixels in your workspace, and it takes a lot of time. So that's why Moho programmers have set a limit of 2 pixels for it. So when Moho reaches a gap, it tries to fill that gap by finding another point 1 pixel or 2 pixels away. But since we are so close to this gap, we have a lot of pixels between them. However, if we zoom out, they'll be close enough for Moho to find the next point. Here in Moho 14, I have a path that is almost closed, and using paint bucket tool, I'm gonna zoom out and click in the middle. If I zoom in, you can see that it created a shape, but it also created a path apart from the path that we created. I'm gonna hit Ctrl Z, and you can see that here in Moho 14, we have a new option called pixel expansion. So now when it reaches a gap, to fill that gap is going to search up to 2 pixels away. And in Moho 14 you can change this value, so you can type any value between 2 and 8. So for example, this time I'm going to type 8, and then I zoom out and use my paint bucket to create my shape, and you can see that it's the same path that we had created, and if I move it, there is just one path here. So pixel expansion helps you fill the gap between 2 points and create your shape without going really far. Now let's talk about color points. Here in this example, I want to select these 2 points and make them smooth. And then using color points tool, I'm going to change the color of these points. So I want to choose a blue color for this one, and maybe a red color for this one. And then I'm going to leave the rest of the points to be green, and see how smooth these colors are. So now in Moho 14, if we draw the same thing, you can see that the colors won't be smooth anymore. So it's just one of the drawbacks of Moho 14. Now in Moho 13.5, using curvature tool, I'm going to move these handles to down here. And let's do the same thing in Moho 14. So first I'm gonna select curvature tool and move these handles to down here. And to compare them with each other, first I'm gonna go to Moho 13.5 and then I hit Ctrl R to render. Next I'm gonna go to Moho 14 and then hit Ctrl R to render it in Moho 14. And because we moved the control points of the handles down, the colors of the points have also gone down. But in Moho 13.5, the colors are still there. And unlike Moho 14, they haven't gone down. So now you know that in Moho 14, the position of the control points of your handles have effects on the colors of your points. Whereas in Moho 13.5, they don't have any effect on them. If I want to talk about layer transform tool, I have to say in Moho 13.5, show path option was checked. So when you created an animation, you could see the path of it. And by holding down the control, you could add point to it. And it was really helpful to create curved movements. But in Moho 14, by default, that option is off. So when you create an animation, there will be no path. If you want to use it, you have to go and check it. And after that, using control, you can add point to it and create your favorite animation. It's time to talk about text tool. In Moho 13.5, you had a limited number of fonts. So for example, if I search for the special font that I use in my videos, it doesn't support it. But Moho 14 will support all of the installed fonts on your system. So for example, if I search for my special font, Moho 14 will support it. Now let's talk about style window. In Moho 13.5, there was a black grid between your colors. So sometimes when you wanted to select a color, the black color of your grid would be chosen instead. And the reason is that your basic color is actually a PNG image and you're just picking these colors from an image. However, in Moho 14, the image has been replaced with a new one with no grid, so you don't have to worry about the black color of your grid anymore. And as you can see, in Moho 14, we have some new styles that we can use. From here, you can select them to edit them. And from here, you can apply them to your shapes. So for example, we select this shape and that one, and then we select our favorite style. The reason that they've added these styles in Moho 14 is that in the previous versions of Moho, we didn't have any style as preset. But now we have some presets to use. In Moho 13.5, the list value of width is 0.25, but in Moho 14, the list value of width is 0.2. So they've just made it simpler to read by using one decimal digit. In Moho 13.5, when you apply a gradient effect on your shape, by default it has 3 colors. So if you click on OK, the result would be something like this. But in Moho 14, by default your gradient effect has 2 colors. So now if I click on OK, it will be something like this. Also, the brush settings window has been changed a lot. For example, now we have no brush for when no brush is selected. The name of some of the options has been changed. Only the name of them, they are just the same options. And also these new names are shorter, which makes them easier to read. And these 3 options are new in Moho 14. And also there is a new option called line boil. It's not a new option, it's actually the opposite of minimize frame to frame randomness that we had in Moho 13.5. Also, some of the brushes that we had for Moho 13.5 are no longer available in Moho 14. And instead we have some new brushes. While in Moho 13.5 you could see the format of your images with the name of your brush, in Moho 14 you can't see the format with the name of your brush. And the reason is that in Moho 13.5 for some of the brushes the format were written, but for multi-brushes we didn't have any format. So they decided to remove the formats from the name of the brushes in Moho 14, so all of the names will be written the same. Now I'm gonna teach you how to use brush settings. To begin, I'm gonna select my shape and increase its width. And then I go to brush settings. I'm gonna start with this brush. So right now all of these stamps are aligned with the path of this circle. But if I uncheck align brush with curve, they will all have the same rotation. Now I want you to look at this brush and then compare it with this one. As you can see, this one has 3 dots at the top left corner of it. The brushes that has these 3 dots in Moho are multi-brushes. Our current brush is not a multi-brush because each stamp of it is like the others. And that's why random stamp order option is in gray for our current brush. Now let me select this multi-brush. The stamps of a multi-brush are different from each other. So when you draw using a multi-brush, Moho is gonna put a series of images or stamps next to each other in some sort of order to create your brush. And to change that order, you can use this checkbox. And Moho will change the order of them. Now I'm gonna click on OK. And then I create a new layer. After that, I choose the Freehand tool. And then I decrease the value of alpha. So my brush will be transparent. and then I draw a line and then draw on it over and over again so I can have a dark stroke like this. And then using select shape tool, I click on select all to select all of the strokes that I've just drawn, and then I check merge alpha and click on OK. As you can see, it's completely dark here, but if we render it, we'll have some transparency, and it's because we checked merge alpha. Now let me select these strokes one more time and go to brush settings and uncheck merge alpha. Now if we click on OK and render, it will be completely dark. So we use merge alpha option to keep the transparency when we have a brush on a brush. The next option is tint brush using stroke color. For black and white brushes, this option is in gray, and by default it's been checked and considered as on. But look, here we have a colored brush. If we select it, tint brush using stroke color won't be gray and it will be off. So let's say for now we select this one and we leave this option to be unchecked and click on OK. And as you can see, if we change the color of our stroke, nothing's gonna happen. But if we check tint brush using stroke color and click on OK, the color of our brush will be the color of our stroke. So now as you can see, we can change the color of our brush. So for black and white brushes, the color of them will be always the color of your stroke. And that's why tint brush using a stroke color is always on for them. But for colored brushes, you have the chance to choose between the color of the images of your brush or the color of a stroke. And that's why tint brush using a stroke color is not great for them. Now I'm going to choose this brush and correct its spacing. So using spacing, you can tell Moho how many stamps you want between every 2 points of your shape. Now it's time to talk about line boil. First, let me check it. And I have to say checking it does not guarantee having it, because the value of angle drift and the value of jitter angle have also effect on your line boil. When your angle drift is 0, the value of jitter angle will be the maximum value that every stamps of your brush can jitter. For instance, if I type 30 for jitter angle and click on OK and hit space to play my animation, you can see that they're jittering but not very much, at most 30 degrees. Now I'm gonna type 100 for it and then click on OK. See how aggressively they're jittering? So using jitter angle, you can tell Moho how much you want your stamps to jitter. And also you should know that these stamps are jittering because we checked line boil. And it's the line boil that allows the stamps to jitter. Now let me select another brush. And right now, because the stamps of my image are aligned with my curve, I'm gonna uncheck align brush with curve so they will all have the same rotation. And I want you to look at the value of jitter angle right now. It's 0. And now if we change the value of angle drift, and to make it more visible, I'm gonna type something like 90. You can see that as we go through our path, every stamp of our brush is gonna rotate more, from 0 up to 90 degrees that we set for it. But as you can see, our jitter angle is 0 now. Now if we increase it, you can see that now instead of jittering, using jitter angle, we're rotating our stamps by the same angle. It's because our angle drift is not 0 now. So if we drag on it to change it to 0, as soon as it becomes 0, the value of jitter angle will be used for jittering and not to rotate your stamps by the same angle. I said jittering, but you know that we only can see jittering when the line boil is on. When the line boil is off, we can use jitter angle to add some variation to the angle of the stamps of our brush. So right now jitter angle is gonna add some variation to the stamps of our brush because drift angle is 0. So if we change the value of drift angle to something else, and check line boil, we won't have any jittering because the value of jitter angle is not be used for jittering anymore. So now again I repeat, checking line boil doesn't guarantee having it. To have line boil rather than checking it, you also have to make sure the value of your angle drift is 0 and the value of your jitter angle is not 0. And then you can click on OK and have your line boil. Also, I have to say that in Moho 13.5 you had an option called minimize frame to frame randomness, and it was the opposite of line boil. So in Moho 13.5, when you uncheck your minimize frame to frame randomness, it means that you check your line boil, and vice versa. However, in Moho 13.5 you can't see the result of your jittering unless you render your project. But here in Moho 14 we can easily see the jittering in our workspace in real time. Since the connection between line boil, jitter angle and angle drift might be confusing for some of the users, I decided to show you this table. I'm gonna skip it in 3, 2, and 1. To teach you how to use randomness interval, I'm gonna type 30 for jitter angle, and while randomness interval is 1, I'm gonna play my animation. And because it's 1, you're gonna see the jittering in every frame. But let's say we want to see the jittering every 4 frames. So we can type 4 for randomness interval. Look how cartoony it is. The reason is we see the jittering every 4 frames. Or for example, if we type 8 for randomness interval, we're gonna see them jitter every 8 frames. So more randomness interval means less frame rate for jittering. Also, if you type 0 for your randomness interval and hit OK and play your animation, you'll see that none of them will be jittering. However, if I select Transform Points tool and create an animation for the path of this shape, and then go back to frame 0 and play my animation, you'll see that when the point of your path is moving, your brush is jittering. So when randomness interval is 0, you're gonna see the jittering only when your path is moving. Here is the summary of how to use randomness interval. And I'm gonna skip this summary in 3, 2, and 1. To talk more about spacing, you know that this circle has 4 points. And when you change the value of it, you're changing the number of stamps between every 2 points. To talk about size variation amplitude, I have to say that when you increase it, it will add some variation to the size of every stamp. This way some parts of it will be thicker and some parts of it will be thinner. And finally we have size variation scale, and if you increase it, your stamps will get bigger or smaller more frequently. Unfortunately, they forgot to change the name of minimize frame to frame randomness to line boil in user manual. However, I'm sure they will update it soon. To create your own brush, first you have to create your content folder. The first time that you open Moho, this message will show up and Moho asks you for the address of your content folder. You can tell it never show this message again when you open Moho, or you can choose not now if you want it to ask you for the address of your content folder every time you open your Moho, or you can click on choose to give it an address. Another way to give the address is that you can go to Edit, Preferences, and then click on Custom Content Folder. After that, you select your folder and click on Select Folder. Now you can see the address of your content folder here, and don't forget to click on OK. Then if you go to that address, you'll see a new folder called Moho Pro. And inside that folder we have some new folders, and one of them is called brushes. We use this folder to create our custom brush. So first I'm gonna double click on brushes, and for my first brush I create a new folder. This time I'm gonna test the JPG format, so I call it my JPG brush, and then I open it. So now inside this folder and address I'm gonna paste the image of my brush. After that I go to Photoshop to draw my brush. And here we have a white layer now. I'm gonna create a new layer on top of it. And then I'm gonna draw some circles. I start with a light green. And as I draw them from left to right, I'm gonna draw them darker and darker. So now the right side of it is closer to black and the left side of it is closer to white. Okay, let's save it. I go to the address of my content folder and I go to brushes folder. See, this is the same address of our content folder. So I go to the folder that I created. And because we're saving it with a white background, it doesn't matter if the format of our file is PNG or JPG, because at the end of the day, it will be a non-transparent image. So let's say I choose JPG and type a name for the file, and then I click on save, and with these settings, I click on OK. Now, if your Moho is opened, close it and open it. And if it's closed, just open it. Now here in Moho 14, I choose Freehand tool and go to brush settings. And here comes the hard part. You have to find your brush. There it is. Let's click on it. And because our image was non-transparent, you can see that it's totally black, even though our image was colored. And tint brush using stroke color is in gray and checked. Now if I click on OK and let me increase my width. To test it, first let me just click. And if I zoom in, you can see that it recognizes the darkness and brightness of our image. I want to test its transparency, so I create a new layer and move this new layer to the back of the other one. Then using draw shape tool, I pick a yellow color and then I draw a yellow rectangle at the back of this brush. And you can see that being darker means less transparency and being brighter means more transparency. And all of this is because our image was a non-transparent image. And as you remember, tint brush using stroke color was on for our brush. The color of my brush will be the color of my stroke. And I can change the color. For example, let me choose red. And I want you to know that because the background was white, and for non-transparent images, white means completely transparent in Moho. Moho is drawing these brushes without any background. This time I'm gonna create another brush. Let's call it my PNG brush. After that I go to Photoshop and create a hue saturation adjustment layer. I just want to change the color of this brush so we can recognize it. Alright, this color should be good. This time I'm gonna turn off my background layer, and then I go to the address of the folder that I created, and then I type a name for it. And because this time we want to test a transparent image for our brush, we can't choose JPG format. Because if we choose it, the parts of our image that are transparent will be filled with a color. So we use PNG format instead, because PNG images can be transparent. So I choose PNG and then click on save. And with these settings, I click on OK. After that, make sure your Moho 14 is closed and then open it. And now we can test our new brush. And here is our brush. And now as you can see, tint brush using a stroke color is not gray, meaning that we can check or uncheck it. And by default is off. So now to test this brush, first I'm gonna click. And you know that these are the same colors of our image. Let me drag. And as you can see, Moho is using the original colors of our image to draw our brush. And it's because tint brush using a stroke color is off. But we can check it. And now if I draw, the color of them will be the color of our stroke. So for example, if I change the color to something like blue, Moho will use the blue color to draw my brush. And here you can see a summary of how we can use different formats to create our own brush. As you can see, the formats don't matter. It's the transparency of the image that matters. So rather than JPG and PNG, you can use other formats. If the image that you save with your favorite format is a transparent image, you're gonna see a result like this. If not, you're gonna see a result like this. I'm gonna skip this table in 3, 2, and 1. Now I'm gonna create a multi-brush. So I create a new folder for it, and I want to call it multi-brush. Creating a multi-brush is very easy. You just have to go to that folder and paste more than one image into that folder. So I'm gonna use the images that I created for the other brushes. First I copy this JPG image, and then paste it into the folder of my multi-brush, and then I copy this PNG image, and then paste it into the folder of my multi-brush. And as you can see, the formats of the images that I'm gonna use for my multi-brush are different. So you can have images with different formats for your multi-brush. And since the name of my brush will be the name of the folder, I try to memorize it so I can find it in Moho, and then I open it. After that I select the brush, and from here you can see the name of it. And because one of our images was transparent, tint brush using stroke color is not gray, and by default is off. And before I click on OK, you can see a preview of our multi-brush here, and we can see both of our images in this preview. And now let's click on OK and test the brush. If I drag, you can see that sometimes it uses one of the images and sometimes it uses the other one. The stamps of our PNG image don't have any background, but the stamps of our JPG image has a white background. Here is a summary of how we can create a multi-brush in Moho. I'm gonna skip it in 3, 2, and 1. You can use any resolution that you want to create your brush, but your image is better to be square. Now I'm gonna make this image a non-square image, so you can see the result in Moho 14. I'm gonna save my brush into a folder called non-square. And it doesn't matter which format we use, I'm gonna choose PNG, and then I save it, and with these settings, I'm gonna click on OK. And here in Moho 14, I'm gonna find the brush and select it, and you can see the preview of it and its settings, and then I click on OK. And after that, I click to draw the brush. And you may think it's good, but if I zoom in, you can see that compared to our original image, Moho scales our image. And that's why square images are highly recommended. As you know, to create your own brush, first you have to go to the address of your content folder, and then you go to the brushes folder, and then you create a new folder for the brush that you want to create. If you take a look at the name of the brushes in Moho, you can see that some of them has some underlines and some numbers at the end of their names. These underlines and numbers will be used for the default values of your brush. So you can write your own default values for your brush. For example, let's say you want to call your brush wood. Then to write default values for it, you have to write something like this for the name of your brush. And underlines are very important. We use the first underline to tell Moho that the next characters that we type are the default values of our brush, and the first one will be the default value of align brush with curve. If you want it to be checked, type 1 unless type 0. The next value will be the value of your jitter angle, and the next one is your spacing. If you want the line bool to be checked, type 0 unless type 1. And you may think that is the opposite of what we told about align brush with curve, but it's because in Moho 13.5 we had minimize frame to frame randomness, and now we have line bool that is the opposite of minimize frame to frame randomness. So they changed the name, but they didn't change this part of it. And then if you want to use tint brush, type 1 unless type 0. Of course, if your image is non-transparent, it doesn't matter what you type here, because it will be automatically considered as checked and in gray. After After that, for having random order, type 1 unless type 0. And finally, the last value will be your angle drift. And it doesn't matter what you type after it, Moho is not going to care about it. And you should know that you don't need to type 7 values. You can type the first value only, or the first and second, up to 7. Now I'm going to show you how to do it. First, create your new folder and type a name for it. And then at the end of the name, type an underline and then type your favorite default values. And then it's time to paste an image into that folder. Let's say we paste this image, and after that we open Moho. And if your Moho is opened, you have to first close it and then open it again, so the changes that you have made can be loaded. And then you can open brush settings and select your brush. And from here you can see the name of your file and your default values. The first value is 0. It means that align brush with curve is unchecked. And the second value is 30, which is our jitter angle. The third one is the value of spacing. And the next one is 1, which means that our line ball is unchecked. And then we have a 0, which means that our tint brush is unchecked. After that, we have another 0 for random stamp order, which is unchecked, and then we have a 90 for the value of our angle drift. All of the things that I taught you about creating your own brush can be done in Moho 13.5 as well. And to show you that minimize frame to frame randomness is actually the opposite of line boil, first I uncheck it in Moho 13.5 and then click on OK, and then I save it and go to Moho 14 and open that file. So now if you select the shape and go to brush settings, you can see that the line bool is checked, while we unchecked minimize frame to frame randomness in Moho 13.5. That's why I say they are the opposite of each other. Now it's time to talk about select bone tool. Here in Moho 13.5, I'm gonna create a bone group, and then I choose select bone tool, and you can see that when we have no bone, this option is gray. And if we click on it, nothing's gonna happen. However, in Moho 14, when we click on it, it says none. And they did this because showing something is better than showing nothing. Also, bone constraints drop-down menu has been updated a lot. The drop-down menu in Moho 13.5 was a bit messy. There were some options next to each other without any arrangement. However, in Moho 14, everything is organized. We now have some headings and lines that separate this menu into different sections. In Moho 13.5, the highest number for most of the values was 1, whereas Moho 14 uses %, so you don't have to deal with decimal digits. Rather than changing the order and place of the options, the name of some of them has been changed. For instance, it was unnecessary to write maximum and minimum for angle constraints, because the word angle constraints tells everything itself. Also, ignored by inverse kinematics has been renamed to ignored by IK. They shortened that name in Moho 14 because we have the full name as a heading. Now I'm gonna talk about how to use control bones in Moho 14, because now we have a new option called delay. To begin, I'm gonna draw a rectangle and adjust its position. Then using select points tool, I'm gonna select the points of this side and then click on split. I do it 2 times to add 3 points in between. After that, I select the points of the other side and do the same thing. Click and click. Then I right click on my layer and choose group with selection. Then I right click on that group and choose convert to bone. After that, I right click on my vector layer and choose quick settings. And since I want to see the path of this layer when my bone group is selected, I'm gonna check paths. Then I click on somewhere to close quick settings window. Then I select the bone group and choose add bone tool. And then using shift key, I drag 4 times to draw 4 bones vertically. Let me test it. Yeah, it works very well. And to reset it, you can just drag on your playhead a bit. After that, I choose select bone tool and then I click on bone constraints. You can see the name of your bone here. My last bone is called B4. Then I have B3, B2 and B1. First, I'm gonna select B4 and then I'm gonna tell this bone to follow the angle of B3. Also, it should follow the position of B3 and the scale of it. Now let's do the same thing with B3. I want it to be controlled by the angle, position and scale of B2. And for B2, the angle of it should be controlled by bone 1, also the position of it and the scale of it. And before I click on close, I want you to know that the default value of delay is 0. So now I go to frame 24 and choose transform bone tool, and then I rotate bone 1. This way bone 1 rotates bone 2 rotates bone 3, and bone 3 rotates bone 4. So now we can rotate all of our bones only by rotating one bone. bone 1. After that, I go to frame 48 and rotate bone 1 again. Then I go to the frame 72 and copy the keyframes that I have on the frame 0 using Ctrl C and paste them into the frame 72 by pressing Ctrl V. Then I hold on the Ctrl and right click on the frame 72. This way my animation will be played until the frame 72. And then I go back to frame 0 and play my animation to see if everything works fine. Yeah, everything works fine. Now I'm gonna choose select bone tool and then I select bone 4. And as you can see, the strength of it is now 100%. And it means that, for example, if we rotate bone 3 by 30 degrees, bone 4 will be rotated by 30 degrees as well. Now I go to frame 48 and I want you to look at before. I changed this value to 200 and it means that it rotates twice as before in the entire animation. Meaning that, for example, if we rotate B3 by 30 degrees, B4 will be rotated by 60 degrees. And you can type values less than 0 for it. So now B4 rotates towards B3 but in the opposite direction. And just like the angle, if we change the position of B1, the position of all of them will be changed. See how I'm moving all of them by moving just one bone? And you can even do this for scale. So I change the scale of bone 1 and the scale of rest of them will be changed as well. And then to make a loop, I'm gonna copy the keyframes on the frame 0 and then paste them into frame 72. Now I go to frame 48 and select my last bone and then I go to bone constraints. And from here we can change the strength of position. So now the X of B4 will change twice as the X of B3. Or we can do the same thing with Y. And to move B4 to the opposite direction of B3, you can type the values less than 0. And also we can change the strength of scale as well. You can see that now B4 is longer than the other ones. Or we can use the values less than 0 to decrease the size of it. Now I'm gonna change all of these values to 100 again. In fact, all of the things that we've done so far can be done in Moho 13.5 as well. But in Moho 14, we also can add delay. So let's say we type 8 for the delay of angle. I'm gonna go back to frame 0 and slowly move my playhead so you can see the animation. You can see that B4 rotates late. And if we reach the end of the animation, I want you to look at B4. It continues to rotate for 8 more frames. And if I go to the fast frame, you can see the latency. Not on the frame 0, but you're gonna see it from frame 1. So now that we can see the delay, I can change the value of delay and see the changes in my workspace. And also I have a delay for the position. And if I increase it, it moves B4 to the opposite direction that it should start to move to add some delay to it. Or we can type the values less than 0. And this way our bone will move sooner than the others. So now if I play the animation, you can see that B4 moves 19 frames sooner than the other ones. Let me type 0 for the delay of position. And then we have delay for scale. Now that I set it to 16, you can see that its scale is changing 16 frames later than the other ones. And when we reach the end of the animation, you can see that the scale of it will be changed for 16 frames after it. Now I'm gonna reset everything. So while B4 is selected, I'm gonna choose none for angle, position, and scale. After that, I do the same thing with B3 and then B2. In Moho 14, when you have a chain of bones, there is a really fast way that you can connect them to each other. To use this method, first you have to select all of your bones except your main bone. And by main bone, I mean the parent of all of them. After that, you go to Script, Bone, and then Delay Constraints. Here you can check rotation or translation or scale. Translation is the same as position, there is no difference. So for example, if you check translation, the position of a child bone will be controlled by its parent. Or you can do the same thing with scale or rotation. And here is the delay of it, and here is the strength of it. I'm gonna use this script for rotation, and I'm gonna type 150 for constraint %. And now you can clearly see that all of these 3 bones has delay, and it is very useful for when you want to create overlapping action and follow through. And I have to say that you can only use this script in Moho 14, and it is not available in Moho 13.5. And as you can see, for control bones, this script chooses the parents of every bone. So before you use it, make sure the parents of your bones are correct. And now it's time to talk about bone dynamics. In Moho 13.5, the value of torque, spring, and damping were for the angle of your bones. But in Moho 14, we can apply them to angle, position, and scale. And as you can see, we have a new option called weight. In fact, the default values that you see for the weight of your bones in Moho 14 are based on the length of your bones, which is like Moho 13.5. And the only difference is that in Moho 14, they just put the option so you can change the default weight of your bones in case you want them to have a different weight apart from the length of them. So for example, in Moho 14, I'm going to select this bone and then I go to bone constraints and increase its weight. And now if I go back to frame 0, close this window and play the animation for you, you can see that because this bone has more weight, it continues to rotate and it will stop later than the others. And this time I want to decrease its weight to have a weight less than the others. So I type 0.3. If you play, you can see that our bone doesn't rotate that much. And it's because it's lighter now. In Moho 13.5, we had torque force, spring force, damping force, and the word force was extra, so we no longer have it in Moho 14. Also, thanks to having a bigger window, the name of them are now on top of their values, which makes it easier for the users to use them. Now let's talk about wind. To apply wind to your bone in Moho 13.5, first you have to select your bone. Then in bone constraints drop down menu, check bone dynamics, and I'm gonna check wind, but you look here. So now if I check wind, they will be changed to default values of the wind. Now I'm gonna close this window and select wind tool, and you can see that up here we have 4 options for the wind, and if I play it, you can see that the wind has effect on the angle of our bone. And we can apply wind to the rest of the bones as well. So using select bone tool, I'm gonna hold down the shift and select these 2 bones, and then I check bone dynamics and wind for them. See, if I play it, we'll have this cool wind effect. Now I'm gonna talk about applying wind in Moho 14. First, we have to select our bones, and you should know that the wind effect is all about the angle, and it has nothing to do with position or scale. So to use wind, we have to check the angle, and these 2 options are connected to each other. I want to check the wind, but I want you to look at the values of angle. See, they will be changed to default values of wind. And now if I play it, you can see that it's just like the animation that we had for wind in Moho 13.5. And in Moho 14, the name of wind tool has been changed to force tool. So if I select it, you can see that instead of 4, now we have 6 options up here. Let me go back to frame 0. The name of these 2 options are gravity strength and gravity direction. Another way to see these 2 options is that you can double click on your bone group and then go to bones tab, and then you can see them here. To teach you how you can use them, I'm going to show you another example. So in this example, I'm going to draw the bones of a character. I draw the spine and then left arm. Then I select the spine again and draw the right arm. Then I deselect the bones and draw a tail for my character. And I want this tail to be the parent of the spine and legs. So now while my tail is selected, I'm going to draw the left leg. And after drawing it, I'm going to select the tail again and draw the right leg. Yeah, I think it's enough for this example. Then using select bone tool by holding down the shift key, I'm going to select the bones of the left arm, the bones of the right arm, the bones of the left leg, and the bones of the right leg. Then I go to bone constraints and then check angle and wind. After that, I select force tool and then play the animation. And right now the wind have effect on our bones because of this strength value. So we can just go back to 0 and type 0 for the value of strength. And then if I play it, you can see that none of them will move. And you should know that rather than wind force, we have gravity force in Moho 14. And I set the strength of the wind to 0 so I can show you the gravity force individually. If I type a value like 10 for the strength of my gravity, with this direction and this angle, if I play my animation, you can see that the force is pulling the bones of my character down. So this time I'm gonna type 90 for the direction. If I play the animation, you can see that the gravity is pulling the bones up. And now if I go back to frame 0 and increase the strength of my gravity and hit space to play, we can have this falling animation. Also, you should know that gravity strength and gravity direction can be animated throughout your timeline. And although you can use wind instead of gravity in Moho 13.5, you can't have them both in that software. The wind symbol in Moho 13.5 is at the center of your workspace, and as you zoom in or zoom out, the size of it will change. And I have to say that it got on my nerve, but in Moho 14 it's at the corner, and by zooming in or out, the size of it will remain the same, so it will never bother you. Also, we have a new option for select bone tool called link bones, and as I said, in fact it is not a new option. In Moho 13.5 its name was use selected bones for flexi binding, so they just changed the name. Now we call it link bones to layer or just link bones, and its shortcut is still the same, Ctrl+Shift+F. To teach you how to use link bones, first I'm gonna draw a rectangle and adjust its position. Then I create a new layer and draw a circle next to it. After that I choose curvature tool, hold down the Ctrl and click on somewhere to deselect the points. Then I hold down Ctrl and Shift and select these 2 points and click on peak. Then I deselect the points again and adjust its handles. After that, using transform points tool, I'm gonna move it, scale it and rotate it to adjust its position. And now I can say I have a plant with one leaf. While the points of it are selected, I'm gonna hit Ctrl C and then create a new layer. Inside this layer, I'm gonna hit Ctrl V to paste my leaf, and then I'm gonna rotate it and put it somewhere around here. Then I hold down the shift key, select the bottom layer, right click and choose group with selection, right click and choose convert to bone. After that, I choose add bone tool and draw a bone for my rectangle, and then I draw a bone for the right leaf, and because I want the longer bone to be the parent, I'm gonna select it again, and finally I draw a bone for the left leaf. So now if I select reparent bone tool, you can see that the bones of my leaves are connected to the bone of my rectangle, and if I select bone strength tool, you'll see that every one of these bones has a strength around them. The strength of a bone is an area that the bone can have effect on your shapes. So if I go to a frame rather than 0 and using transform bone tool, I rotate one of my leaves, the bone can have effect on the other leaf as well. Or if I rotate this one, it will have effect on the other one. To fix this, I'm gonna go back to frame 0 and select the layer of my rectangle. Then I'm gonna tell this long bone to only have effect on this layer and not the other ones. So using select bone tool, I'm gonna select it, and then I can go to bone drop down menu and choose link bones to layer, or we can hit Ctrl Shift F, or another way is that we can use link bones. I like this one more, so let me click on it, and now it's time to do the same thing with the layer of my right leaf. I select its bone and click on link bones, and finally it's time to link the last layer, the left leaf. But this time I'm gonna leave it unlinked just to show you what we've done so far. So first I'm gonna rotate my parent bone, and all of them should be rotated, which is completely correct. This time I'm gonna rotate this bone, but you can see that the left leaf is moving, and because we haven't linked it yet, the strength of the right bone is gonna have effect on it. And it means that when you use link bone, you have to link every bone to a layer. Do not leave anything unlinked. So now if I link this last bone and go to my bone layer and a frame other than 0, you'll see that we can move them individually and it will work fine. In Moho 13.5, to change blending mode, we can't use right click. To change it, first you have to double click on your layer. Let me move this window to here, and then you can change your blending mode from here. Let's say we choose this one and click on OK, and we can't see the result in our workspace. We have to render it to see it. But in Moho 14, we just have to right click, and there is a blend mode option, and even before you choose one of them, you can see the result in real time. In Moho 13.5, to mask a group, you just have to right click and choose mask inside bottom layer. But in Moho 14, you have to right click, go to group mask, and then choose mask inside bottom layer. Before I teach you how to use frame by frame layer, you need to know about the differences between instance and copy. Here we have a rectangle. Let's call it number 1. Now I'm gonna make a copy of it and call it number 2. In this case, because we used copy, if we change number 2, number 1 won't change. And if we change number 1, number 2 won't change. This time I'm gonna make an instance of number 1. And let's call it number 2 again. Now if I change number 2, number 1 will change. And if I change number 1, number 2 will change. So we use copy to create a new thing similar to our original thing, but we make an instance of something so we can change all of them by changing one of them. Here in Moho 13.5, I'm gonna create a frame by frame layer. Then for the first frame of it, I'm gonna draw a rectangle. For the second frame, I'm gonna draw a circle. And then for the third one, I draw a triangle. And finally for the fourth one, I draw a star. To understand everything better, I'm gonna write the shapes, their layers, and the frames of them at the left side of the screen. Also, I show the current frame with a red rectangle. If I right click on this frame by frame layer, you can see the layers of it. Also, if I hold my mouse on the keyframes, you can see that which keyframe belongs to which layer. Now I go to the frame of my triangle and select the keyframe of it, and then I hit Ctrl C. After that, if I go to the next frame, it will be the frame of my star. But to paste this keyframe, I'm gonna go to the frame after it and then hit Ctrl V. Now here comes the question, is it a copy or an instance? So if I right click on my frame by frame layer, you'll see that layer 3 is checked, which means that we haven't created a new layer. It's just the same layer as before. So it means that if we select transform points tool and hold on the control and click on somewhere to deselect the points, if we move a point of this frame and go back to the frame of our original triangle, you'll see that the point of it has been moved as well. So in Moho 13.5, if you select the keyframe of your frame by frame layer and then hit Ctrl C and V, you're actually making an instance of it. And Moho does this by using one single layer for multiple keyframes. But let's say instead of an instance, we want to create a copy in Moho 13.5. To do that, go to the frame that you want, make sure your layer is selected, and then click on duplicate. So now we duplicated the layer of our star. If I choose transform points tool, hold down the control and click on somewhere to deselect its points, and move one of them and go back to our original star, you can see that it hasn't been changed. So by duplicating a layer like this, we can make a copy of our keyframes. And Moho does this by using a different layer for each keyframe. Now in an example similar to the previous one, I'm going to show you how you can make a copy or instance in Moho 14. First, I'm going to find the keyframe of my triangle. There it is. Then I select its keyframe and hit Ctrl C. After that, I go to 2 frames after it and hit Ctrl V. Is it a copy or an instance? Let's find out. The layer of it is called layer 5. So it uses a different layer from our original layer. And therefore, it should be a copy. But let's test it. Using transform points tool, I'm going to move one of its points. And if I go 2 frames back, you can see that our original keyframe has remained unchanged. So unlike Moho 13.5, when you're working with frame by frame layers, using Ctrl C and V, you can make a copy of your keyframes. Now I'm going to show you how you can create an instance in Moho 14. As you know, the layer of this frame is called layer 3. If you're not sure, just hold your mouse on the keyframe of it. So now let's say we want to make an instance from this keyframe. First, memorize the name of the layer of that keyframe. In this case, we know that it's layer 3. After that, we go to the frame that we want to create our instance. After that, we right-click on our frame by frame layer, and then we choose the name that we memorized. This way we can make sure that Moho uses the same layer. Also, you should know that you can do the same thing in Moho 13.5 too. Now, if we move a point of this triangle and go back to our original keyframe, you'll see that it's been changed as well. And it's because both use the same layer. So this is how you can create an instance in Moho 14. In Moho 13.5, if you select the sublayer of your frame by frame layer, you can go to a frame other than 0 and create keyframe and animate the shapes of that sublayer. So now you can see the movement here. But in Moho 14, there is a bug and you can't open your frame by frame layers to see their sublayers. To have access to your sublayers, you can search for the name of them. So for example, this is my layer 1. And if I want to have access to the third keyframe, I have to search for 3. And then we can select its layer and go to the frame that we want and move its points to create our favorite animation. And now if I move the playhead, you can see that the point of my shape is moving. But there is another way to select your sublayers. You can double click on your frame by frame layer, then you go to switch tab and uncheck frame by frame drawing. After that, click on apply, and now you can see that we fixed the bug. If we click on here, we can have access to our sublayers. And now because it's not a frame by frame layer anymore, we can check that option again and then click on OK. And now we're good to go and we can select the layers and animate them. But you have to remember that you shouldn't close your frame by frame layer anymore. If you close it, the bug will happen again. Now I'm going to talk about the changes of layer settings window. I'm going to start with General tab. The name of some of the options has been changed. Only the name of them, they're just the same options as before, which not only makes them easier to read, but also makes the whole window smaller. In Moho 13.5, since the window was too big, you couldn't see behind it very well. Whereas in Moho 14, the window is smaller and you have some space to look at your animation. In Moho 13.5, using add point tool, normally if you drag and drag, you'll have something like this. But rather than this method, you can use an older system to draw, which was used in previous versions of Moho. To use it, you have to double click on your layer and go to Vectors tab, and then you can check Legacy Curves, and then hit OK. Since I want to compare the path of these two layers, I right click on one of them and choose Quick Settings, and then I check Paths. This way I can see the path of this layer when it is not selected. Now if I drag and drag to draw a path, you can see that when we use Legacy Curves, the start and end of it will have a handle, but using the new system of drawing, we don't have any handle for them. Also, when you go to Edit, Preferences, and then Layers and Objects tab, here you will see an option called Legacy Curves for new layers. If you check it and click on OK, the next time that you create a new layer, Legacy Curves for that layer will be automatically checked. However, in Moho 14, legacy curves for new layers has been removed from preferences window. Also, if you go to layer settings of a layer and then vectors tab, you can see that there is no legacy curves option. In Moho 13.5, when you draw a shape inside a layer and then create a new layer and draw another shape inside of it, you can double click on the second layer and go to vectors tab and choose your first layer as your warp layer. This way, the shapes of layer 2 will be controlled by the shapes of layer 1. So I choose layer 1 and click on OK. And although the name of it became gray, the icon of it is still the same. But if I move the playhead, the icon of it will change, showing that it's a warp layer. In fact, they fixed the bug in Moho 14. Now if I select your warp layer, I'm gonna click on OK, but you look here, as soon as I click on OK rather than the name, the icon of it will change. Now I'm gonna talk about a new option that has been added in Moho 14 called frame dependent warping. To begin, I'm gonna draw a shape in my first layer, then I create a new layer and draw a shape inside of it. Then I go to a frame other than 0 and select transform points tool, and I move one of its points, so now we have this animation. And then I double click on layer 2 and go to vectors tab, and then I'm gonna choose layer 1 as its warp layer and go to a frame other than 0. Now if I double click on my warp layer and go to vectors tab, you'll see a new option called frame dependent warping. While this option is unchecked, if we move the points of our warp layer, it will ruin the shape and it pushes the points of your shape to outside of the shape of your warp layer. But this time let me check it to see what will happen. And you can see that this new feature keeps your shapes inside, and also it tries to keep the proportion of the edges of your shape. And now all I have to do is to just uncheck so you can see how bad the previous feature was. But this new feature was incredible. Well done, developers. And I have to say that in Moho 13.5 you don't have any option for frame dependent warping, and by default it will be considered as unchecked. But when you use frame dependent warping, you have to be careful because the shape of your warp layer should cover all of your shape. Right now, one of the points of my shape is outside of the shape of my warp layer. So if I move the points of my warp layer, that point won't move. And the reason is that it is outside of the shape of my warp layer. However, if I uncheck frame dependent warping, you'll see that without frame dependent warping, we have control over all of the points of our shape, whether they are inside the shape of our warp layer or outside of it. There was another bug in Moho 13.5. Actually, in this example, if I go to frame 24 and move these 2 points like this, and maybe move these 2. If I go to the other layer, hold on the control and click on somewhere to deselect these points and try to move this point, you see this bug. Actually, this point is deciding to be inside or outside of this rectangle. And if I release the click and go back, you can see that it suddenly jumps in your animation. Again here, for example, if I move it to inside the rectangle, you will see that it suddenly jumps inside of it. So although there is no solution in Moho 13.5 for this, in Moho 14 if you check frame dependent warping, you're not gonna see this problem. And although in user manual frame dependent warping has not been explained yet, I'm sure they will update it soon and they will explain about it. In Moho 13.5, when you have an audio layer, if you go to its layer settings and audio tab, you'll see that the default value of audio level is 1 and it doesn't have any unit. However, in Moho 14, the default value of it is 100 and it's based on %. The default values of particle options have been changed in Moho 14. However, they are just the same options with the same names. Also in Moho 14, if you go to layer settings of your particle layer, in Particles tab, you'll see the new default values. In Moho 13.5, if you go to Project Settings window, you'll see an option called Minimize Frame to Frame Randomness. Now, if I uncheck it, click on OK and save this project, and then in Moho 14, try to open that project, and then go to Project Settings window, you'll see that we have a new option called Line Boil, and since it's checked, it's the opposite of Minimize Frame to Frame Randomness. Unfortunately, they forgot to change the name of the option in user manual. However, I'm sure they'll update it soon. Moho 13.5 only supports 6 languages, but in Moho 14, you have 15 languages to choose. Now I'm gonna show you the images of Moho 14 for different languages. English, Arabic, Catalan, Deutsch, Espanol, Persian or Farsi, French, Hindi, Japanese, Korean, Portuguese, Russian. I know that the image is different, I'll tell you why. Turkish, Chinese simplified, Chinese traditional. Actually in Moho 14, if you go to Edit, Preferences and then choose Russian and click on OK, when you close the software and open it again and try to create a new document, after 1 or 2 seconds your Moho will crash. This bug happens only to Moho 14.0 and only to Russian language and only when you want to create a new document, and I think they will fix this bug in future updates of Moho 14. So don't worry about it. But if for some reason you can't open your Moho and your Moho crashes, I created a software called Moho Resetter. Using it, you can reset your Moho without opening it. It is only 3 megabytes and free. This software can do a full reset without deleting the addresses of your saves or the address of your content folder. Also, in case you want to reset a specific part of the software, you can just uncheck the option, and then if you click on reset, that option will be reset. If you would like to create a script for Moho, you should know that now Moho 14 uses Lua 5.4.4, and if you want to know how you can create a script for Moho 14, go and check this website. Also, this website helps you to update the scripts that you wrote for previous versions of Moho, so you can use them in Moho 14. Now I'm going to talk about the things that could have been improved, but they haven't. For example, let's say we draw a shape and select it. We have an option for fill here and another here. If we uncheck this one, the other one will remain checked. Also, the same bug happens to stroke. We unchecked it, but see, it's still checked here. As I said, in Moho 14, most of the values have a unit, but they forgot to change the value of color strength to %. Also, the value of bone strength is still without any unit. Also, when you choose Layer Transform tool, if you drag on X, Y, or Z, you have to use Ctrl Z a lot of times to have your shape back at its first position. However, you can do this in many softwares by using one Ctrl Z. We have this problem since they added a feature to drag on the values in Moho 13. You know that in Moho, the shortcut of Transform Points tool is T. And right now, the language of my system is English, so if I hit the T key, Transform Points tool will be selected. And I'm not sure if they can fix this bug, but if you change the language of your system to something else such as Persian, your shortcuts won't work, no matter how many times I hit the T key. Also, the quick settings window still doesn't have a close option. You can close it by hitting escape or clicking outside of it. But it's weird that we have the apply, but we don't have cancel nor OK. Here I'm gonna give this layer a red color and give this one a yellow color. Then I'm gonna go to a frame other than 0 and create keyframe for the shapes of these two layers. After that, I go back to frame 0, hold down the control and select both of the layers, and now you can see the color of them. But if I change them to something like blue, nothing's gonna happen. And the reason is that you have to move your mouse inside this highlighted area to update the colors. And I thought maybe they solved it in Moho 14, but it's still there. When you draw some shapes on top of each other, using Select Shape tool, you can select one of them and then go to Draw and choose Lower to Back. This way you can send your shape to the back of all of the shapes, no matter how many shapes you have. Also, you can use Raise to Front to move your shape to the front of all of the shapes. You might say there is no bug here, but when you select multiple shapes, if you go to Draw and select Lower to Back, you can see that Moho will only send one of them to the back of all of the shapes. We still have one of them at the front, so maybe they will fix it in the future updates. And speaking of the bugs, does anyone know what's wrong with the eyes of this fox in Moho 14? If you import this project into Moho 14, there will be a problem with the rotation of the head. To be honest, I don't know what's wrong with it, but if you know the answer, let me know in the comment section. If you've done a project in Moho 13.5 and you want to open it in Moho 14, this table shows you the changes that will happen after you import it into Moho 14. I'm gonna skip it in 3, 2, and 1. Also, if you export your project from Moho 14 and import it into Moho 13.5, these changes will happen to your project. I'm gonna skip it in 3, 2, and 1. And before I finish the video, let me be honest with you and answer this question. Is it worth it to buy Moho 14? You know, the first time that I opened Moho 14, I thought maybe they just changed some of the icons and names, so I would expect this tutorial to be a 30 to 40 minutes tutorial. But as I started to make this video and compare Moho 14 with Moho 13.5, I realized that Moho 14 is just wonderful. The number of improvements is unbelievable. And don't get me wrong, Moho 14 has too many minor bugs as I showed you. But as I taught you, all of them can be avoided, so they are not a really big deal. And it is completely normal for the first version of a software to have these problems. And since Moho 14.1 is gonna be released, I'm sure they will fix all of those bugs. And personally, the graphic system of Moho 14 is my favorite, and the fact that you can see everything in real time. Also, I like new features such as liquid shapes and frame dependent warping, and all of the improvements of timeline window and frame by frame layer. So if you ask me, I would say yes, it is worth it. The sooner you buy it, the more you will have time to learn it. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and thank you for 1,000 hours of watch time. And you know that you can't find tutorials like mine anywhere else, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and see you in the next one.